The forces of the Muram Alliance and the demonic cult arrived at the Northern Ice Palace. Guest rooms and tents had been arranged to accommodate them. Inside the palace office, Dan Juchin observed that the combined forces numbered more than 1,000 people. He expressed embarrassment, remarking that once the matter of the dragon turtle was resolved, the palace would need to be expanded to properly accommodate such a large number of guests. Sayol Youngi assured him that the issue would be handled. He stated that for now, they could only hope nothing would occur during the night, as the visitors would need at least a full day of rest after their long journey. Dan Juchin responded with uncertainty, explaining that he was not even sure the guests would be able to rest properly. The vibrations that had begun at Sealed Turtle Island had already reached the palace, causing the entire structure to tremble. Within his mind, Dan Juchin felt unease as he noticed the vibrations growing increasingly frequent. Even though everyone was working to seal away the dragon turtle, he could not shake the anxiety rising inside him. Meanwhile, Hobum clung tightly to a pillar, visibly terrified by the unusual shaking of the ice palace. Wang Hul burst into loud laughter, mocking Hobum by remarking that despite the improvement in his martial arts, he remained exactly the same as before. The 6 swords joined in the laughter at Hobum's ridiculous reaction, while he pouted in frustration. Hobum shouted in protest, arguing that it was far stranger for anyone not to be surprised when the entire building was shaking. Rather than standing on her own, Munku held on to Chun Yowon. Fear showed nowhere on her face. Instead, she smiled cheerfully, explaining with amusement that she was completely fine because the support she was holding onto was very strong. Hobum dismissed the sight with clear annoyance, telling her to do whatever she wanted. Wang Hul and the others laughed again after seeing Hobum's disgruntled expression. Chun Yowon eventually let out a laugh of his own. As he walked down the hallway toward the residence, the moment stirred memories of the past, reminding him of the days they had spent together at the academy. Deep within, Yowon reflected on how much had happened since those times. Looking back, he realized those had been good days, and the memory of them stirred a quiet sense of longing in his heart. Oh Young, the lieutenant of the Frost Sword Squad who was guiding them toward the rooms on the 4th floor of the palace, spoke with a reassuring smile. He told them not to worry too much, explaining that the palace had been built from Dwan stone, making it unlikely to collapse despite the shaking. Hobum immediately questioned him, asking if the palace might fall if the vibrations became even stronger. Oh Young hesitated and admitted that he was not certain, though he added that everything had been fine until now. Hobum suddenly pointed toward the wall and loudly drew attention to visible cracks spreading across it. Before the moment could escalate further, Sanghwa struck the back of Hobum's head with a sharp slap, cutting off his behavior. She rebuked him for being excessively rude, scolding him for acting as though he were in his own home. Oh Young responded with a light laugh. Within his thoughts, Oh Young found the situation surprisingly interesting. He had always heard that the people of the demonic cult were cold and hostile, yet the group before him seemed no different from ordinary people. Meanwhile, Chun Yowon placed his hand against the cracked wall. Inside his mind, he asked Nano to analyze the condition of the building. Nano acknowledged the request and began scanning the structure. As the system activated, a faint light escaped from Yowon's palm. After examining the cracks, Nano reported that they had formed only recently. The system concluded that the damage was rapidly worsening. Before the report could be completed, a violent rumble shook the palace. Within his mind, Oh Young was alarmed. He realized that the vibrations had never been this strong before, nor had they occurred with such frequent intensity. At that moment, Samachuk, who had remained calm until then, voiced his concern and asked whether the situation was truly safe. Oh Young forced out a laugh and tried to reassure everyone, explaining that although the shaking was somewhat intense, the ceiling should not suddenly collapse since the palace had been constructed from Dwan stone. Another powerful rumble cut him off mid-sentence. The entire palace shook again, and a sharp cracking sound followed. Pieces of the damaged wall broke apart and fell to the floor. Everyone's expression stiffened at the sight. Cold sweat began forming on Hobum's face as anxiety took hold of him. With unease evident in his voice, he once again asked whether everything was truly safe. Oh Young quickly concluded that remaining inside the palace was no longer wise. He stated that it would be best for them to leave the building immediately, explaining that he needed to report the situation to the palace master's proxy. He then instructed everyone to follow him at once. At that moment, a violent rumble echoed through the palace. The building groaned loudly as it shook. Cries of alarm erupted as the palace swayed from side to side under the force of the vibrations and began leaning to one side. In that very instant, Chun Yo-won stomped his foot onto the floor. Frost spread instantly across the collapsing surface, freezing over the cracks that had begun to split apart. That was not the only astonishing sight. As fragments of the ceiling started falling, the pieces suddenly halted in mid-air, as though some invisible force was holding them in place. A thick cloud of dust spread across the floor. Startled by the scene, Oh Young struggled to comprehend what was happening. He soon noticed that Ko Wang-hul, Hobom, Mong Mu, and the Great Guardian Markim all had their arms extended forward. 3 superior masters and 1 supreme master were using their power to hold the falling debris of the ceiling suspended in mid-air. Wang-hul strained under the immense weight and urgently urged that the others leave first. Markim also struggled to maintain his strength and supported Wang-hul's plea, insisting that the Demon Lord should leave immediately. Chun Yo-won calmly remarked that since the building was destined to collapse anyway, destroying it completely should not matter. Young reacted with confusion at those words. Leaving the 4 struggling warriors behind, Chun Yo-won raised his hand. A sharp creaking sound echoed as the frost condensed with far greater energy. In an instant, hundreds of ice swords formed throughout the hallway. Within his mind, Yo-won instructed Nano to activate the self-targeting system and destroy everything. Nano immediately confirmed the command and initiated the targeting sequence. As Yo-won extended his hand toward the ceiling, the ice swords aligned themselves toward their target. With a sharp whistling sound, the swords shot forward. They pierced straight into the ceiling. The ice blades tore through the structure, striking simultaneously. The walls and ceiling shattered with such speed and precision that not a single person suffered even the slightest scratch. Panicked cries erupted as people shouted about an earthquake and urged everyone to escape. Chaos spread throughout the palace as people rushed outside. Dan Juchin smashed through the wall of the building and leapt out together with Elder Youngie. Still shaken, Youngie struggled to believe what had just occurred. He expressed relief that they had been on the top floor, realizing that escaping would have been far more difficult had they been anywhere else in the building. Dan Jushin stared in astonishment. Only recently had he managed to claim the position he believed he rightfully deserved, yet such a disaster had struck immediately afterward. Sudden cries of pain and desperation echoed from within the collapsing structure as the main building gave way. While some people had managed to escape in time, others had not been as fortunate, leaving them either crushed beneath the rubble or trapped under the debris. Dan Jushin hurried forward and spread cold chi across the broken pillars. A surge of white frost burst from his hand, reinforcing the fractured supports. Looking inside the collapsing structure, he urgently called out for the people within to escape. Although he had managed to get out quickly, nearly half of the people and officials who had been inside had yet to emerge. Dan Juchin raised his voice and ordered anyone capable of using cold chi to freeze the most unstable parts of the building to help others escape. Meanwhile, Chun Yo-won had already used his cold chi to completely disintegrate the collapsing ceiling into fine dust. Afterward, he looked around and checked on his followers, who responded with nods to show that they were unharmed. Oh Young watched in stunned disbelief. Within his mind, he struggled to accept what he had just witnessed. Yo-won had truly reduced the ceiling to dust, and even though he had seen it with his own eyes, the feat still felt impossible to believe. The group was not alone. Members of the Muram Alliance were also present nearby, covered in dust as they gasped heavily for breath. Relief filled the air as several of them panted, realizing that the situation could have been far worse. Huang Bo sighed deeply while staring at the wreckage. Mo Yong-kang pointed out that they would have been crushed beneath the debris if the ceiling had not been frozen. Hobom observed that they must have been directly below the floor where Yo-won's group had been. With blunt honesty, he declared that the Demon Lord had essentially saved their lives and that they ought to be grateful. At that moment, Youngie hurried over to the Muram officials, expressing immense relief that they had survived. Among them stood Jagal Sohi, visibly bruised. She questioned what had happened, recalling that the cave containing the dragon turtle was supposed to be quite far away. If the vibrations had truly been caused by the dragon turtle attempting to escape, then it felt as though the creature was directly beneath them. Youngie admitted that he was equally shocked by how suddenly everything had occurred. If the dragon turtle had truly broken free, someone should have already reported it. Just then a realization struck him. He abruptly stopped as a troubling thought formed. If the dragon turtle had managed to break through the Adularia stones, someone must have interfered with the seal. The possibility that the seal had been lifted suddenly crossed his mind. Youngie immediately turned his gaze toward the direction where the dragon turtle had been sealed. Unlike the palace, where the vibrations had reached their peak, the mountain cavity remained strangely quiet, disturbed only by the cold wind whistling through the air. Inside the torchlit cavern, 500 warriors stood with their palms pressed firmly against the frozen ground, releasing streams of cold chi. Among them, Elder Yijong sensed something terribly wrong. Within his thoughts, he realized that he could no longer feel any vibrations beneath the ice stone. The sensation was deeply unsettling. It felt as though nothing existed beneath them anymore. For centuries, the dragon turtle had grown stronger during its confinement, and the idea that it had simply died from exhaustion was impossible to believe. Sensing that something was wrong, Yijong suddenly remembered a troubling possibility and rose to his feet. He ordered the warriors around him to move aside, explaining that he needed to check something. Without wasting another moment, he turned toward the cave's entrance and climbed out, heading to the top of the mountain. Within his mind, he desperately hoped that the ominous feeling gripping him would prove to be nothing more than a mistake. Moments later, a shocking sight greeted him. From the mountaintop, he saw the ice palace far to the south collapsing. Disbelief washed over him as he muttered in shock, unable to accept what he was witnessing. Then another violent sound echoed. Although the building had fallen, something else became visible beneath it. A thunderous series of explosions erupted as the ground of the northern ice palace trembled violently, as if something beneath the earth was forcing its way upward. Everyone heard it. It was not the trembling of a simple earthquake. Every instinct within them warned that something far more terrifying was approaching. Before the main building of the ice palace, the earth curved inward as the tremors continued, until something massive began to emerge. The ground cracked apart and a deafening roar followed. Everyone froze, holding their breath as they stared at the creature that appeared. At first glance, it resembled a dragon. No, more like an amugi, but its body was unlike either. The form reminded them of the spirit beasts described in ancient records. Yet what shocked them the most was its sheer size, far greater than anything they had ever imagined. The creature roared like a dragon, and the sound pierced through the ears of everyone present. The scream was so overwhelming that people instinctively covered their ears to endure the deafening force. The beast then soared upward as powerful currents of electricity swirled around its body. The spectacle was so immense that it could be seen even from the distant mountains of the northern ice palace. Watching the scene from afar, Yijong cursed in fear as the horrifying truth became clear to him. The dragon turtle had emerged from beneath the palace ground. Youngie stared at the creature in disbelief. He realized that instead of attempting to break the ice stone sealing it, the beast had tunneled its way through the earth until it reached the palace itself. The reason the vibrations had grown stronger was not merely because the creature's power had increased, but because it had been drawing closer the entire time. Fury exploded within Dan Yuchen. He shouted in rage, condemning the creature for destroying the ice palace and vowing to kill it. Drawing his snowfield blade, he unleashed a surge of cold chi and lunged forward, striking toward the massive dragon-like beast covered in black scales. However, the attack failed. Despite the blade being empowered with chi, it could not pierce the creature's scales. Shock flashed across Dan Yuchen's face for a brief moment, but he refused to retreat. At that very moment, flashes of light erupted from the creature's body. Powerful electric currents burst outward in all directions. The attack happened so suddenly that no one knew where to run. Dan Yuchen was caught in it as well. He hurriedly formed a shield with his cold chi to block the attack, but the shield shattered instantly. The force of the electric surge hurled him more than 30 feet away. He crashed heavily onto the ground. After rolling across the frozen earth before finally stopping, Dan Yuchen lay there, unable to hide the deep disappointment etched across his face. Within his mind, the truth became painfully clear to him. Now he understood why the creature was called a calamity. He realized that if he had not managed to block the lightning attack in time, he would have been reduced to ashes. The dragon turtle's lightning power was overwhelmingly strong, and its body seemed nearly invincible. Even his sword aura, strengthened while standing at the mystic realm, had failed to pierce its scales. A troubling question surfaced inside his mind, whether defeating such a monster was even possible, yet he immediately rejected the thought of retreat. He pushed himself back onto his feet. Fury burned in his eyes as he fixed his glare on the monstrous creature. Resolving himself, he declared that in this battle, he would stake both his life and the fortunes of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Mo Young-kang stared at the monstrous creature in shock. Deep within his mind, he realized that the lightning energy radiating from the dragon turtle was exactly the same power described in the ancient legends passed down through the Moyong clan. Nearby, Jigal Sohee quickly assessed the situation. Inside her mind, she concluded that they needed to gather the rest of their group stationed in the eastern section of the palace and cooperate with the Northern Sea Ice Palace to confront the beast. Meanwhile, members of the demonic cult rushed toward the scene. Hobum reacted with excitement and disbelief as he ran, exclaiming in astonishment to the demon lord about the terrifying lightning they had just witnessed. Chun Yo-won immediately addressed the Six Swords troop, ordering them that once they reached the camping area, they were to carry out the instructions he had given earlier. The Six Swords responded with firm voices, acknowledging the command. At the same time, Dan Jushin shouted urgent orders to the elders and squad leaders, commanding them to locate the remaining members of the Ice Palace. Then the ground erupted once again. A thunderous series of explosions shook the earth as another violent tremor spread outward. From the shattered ground, a second head of the dragon suddenly emerged. Shock rippled through those watching as someone muttered in disbelief at the sight of a different head appearing. Jigal Sohee stared at the creature in confusion. According to the information she had been given, the dragon turtle possessed 4 heads, yet only 2 had appeared so far. The location of the remaining 2 remained unknown. The newly emerged head released a terrifying roar that froze people in place. Mo Young-kang's son, Mo Young-yu, immediately shouted for everyone to retreat. At that moment, the dragon turtle unleashed another thunderous roar. A massive wave of lightning surged outward with the sound. Electric currents crackled violently through the air. The warriors of Mirim turned and ran, trying to escape. However, the attack struck with overwhelming speed, leaving little time to react. Several warriors were hurled away after being struck by the lightning wave, while others were electrocuted on the spot and died instantly. Witnessing the devastation, Mo Young-kang was horrified. The dragon turtle was wielding lightning, and nearly 80 people had been killed by a single attack. Concerned, he called out to General Strategist Jigal Sohee, asking if she was safe and suggesting that she retreat. Yet despite his concern, Jigal Sohee moved forward with a grave expression, clearly intent on going somewhere. Confused, Mo Young-kang demanded to know where she was heading. She replied that she was going to the demonic cult's location because they needed to be informed as well. Mo Young-kang questioned what exactly needed to be conveyed. Jigal Sohee quickly explained her analysis. If her judgment was correct, the dragon turtle was attempting to eliminate them one group at a time. The first head had appeared to observe the situation above ground, and the way their forces had been halted was not a coincidence. She began to explain that the other head was likely. Before she could finish, the ground shook violently once again. The tremor surged toward the northwest direction, where the demonic cult's forces were positioned. The movement matched exactly what Jigal Sohee had predicted. Realizing the urgency, she insisted that they must warn the demonic cult to keep their distance from the creature. Mo Young-kang felt reluctant. Inside his mind, he admitted that he had no desire to assist the demonic cult. However, he also recognized that if their forces were wiped out, defeating the dragon turtle would become far more difficult for everyone. Accepting the necessity, he shouted for his son, and Mo Young-yu immediately responded. Mo Young-kang ordered him to quickly inform the demonic cult's forces that they needed to distance themselves from the dragon turtle. Without hesitation, Mo Young-yu bowed in acknowledgement and rushed to carry out the order. After sending Mo Young-yu away, Mo Young-kang turned toward the surviving warriors and shouted for them to keep their distance while ordering the preparation of fire arrows. Inside his mind, Mo Young-kang recalled the ancient records that instructed warriors to use fire arrows against the dragon turtle. Yet even as he gave the order, doubt lingered within him as he wondered whether such weapons could truly harm a creature of that monstrous scale. Meanwhile, Mo Young-yu rushed toward the northwest. Shock filled him as he saw the situation worsening before his eyes. The massive dragon was already moving. Thunderous vibrations shook the ground as he tried to outrun the creature, but the enormous speed of the dragon's neck made escape nearly impossible. Suddenly, a third head burst out from beneath the ground. Terrified shouts erupted as people screamed about the dragon and urged others to move away. Cries from the members of the demonic cult echoed through the chaos. Unlike the earlier moment when the creature had blocked the advance of the Orthodox forces, this time the dragon emerged directly in the center of the demonic cult's formation. If the creature unleashed lightning from that position, the entire unit would be annihilated. Desperate to warn them, Mo Yong-yu shouted with all his strength for everyone to spread out immediately. But at that exact moment, the dragon released a thunderous roar. Right then, Chun Yo-won shouted a command. At his signal, the cultists immediately slammed iron bars deep into the ground around them, planting numerous poles across the area. A white flash of light appeared within the dragon turtle's body and burst outward as lightning surged through the air. The lightning struck with a violent crackling sound. However, unlike the earlier attacks that spread outward in every direction, the lightning now flowed directly into the ground and was absorbed by the iron bars embedded there. Mo Yong-yu stared in disbelief. He had been certain that the demonic cult members would be electrocuted, yet not a single one of them was harmed. Within his mind, confusion overwhelmed him. He tried to understand the purpose of the iron poles and realized that they had absorbed the lightning. Yet another troubling question surfaced in his thoughts. What about the electricity that had flowed through the ground itself? Meanwhile, the cultists erupted into cheers. They celebrated the success of the plan, shouting that it had worked exactly as the demon lord had predicted. With hardened tree sap attached to their feet, the lightning could not reach them. The sap had originally been valuable trade goods from the palace, yet the demon lord had shared it entirely with them. Within his thoughts, Yo-won felt a quiet sense of relief. He reflected on the plan he had devised with Nano after hearing from Danbake that the dragon turtle possessed lightning chi. Though he had been uncertain about the effectiveness of lightning rods and rubber insulation, the strategy had proven successful. Yo-won's eyes gleamed as he observed the enormous creature before him. Inside his mind, he acknowledged that it was the first living mythical beast he had ever seen. Its presence clearly marked it as no ordinary creature, yet the way it looked down upon him stirred his defiance. The dragon turtle growled deeply. Its yellow eyes, frustrated that its attack had failed, glared down at them with hostility. At that moment, Yo-won signaled toward Mong-mu. Understanding the command immediately, Mong-mu nodded. The sixth elder, who commanded the troops, stepped forward and raised his voice. He declared that the time had come to counterattack and ordered all swordsmen to draw their swords and manifest their blade aura. The warriors responded with powerful voices. 600 members under the six swords drew their weapons, each blade blazing with energy. Yo-won calmly prepared to begin. As he raised his hand, Mong-mu issued another command, ordering all first-class warriors to aim their swords at the dragon's neck. The warriors acknowledged the command in unison. Among the 600 warriors, 60 who had reached the master level moved to surround the dragon. From all directions, they unleashed sword chi, internal energy, and various attacks toward the creature's thick neck. The dragon turtle had not anticipated such coordinated assaults. Its massive body twisted as it attempted to counter the attacks and prevent the warriors from continuously striking its body with chi techniques. Watching the battle unfold, Markim observed that simple sword aura alone was not causing significant damage to the creature. At that moment, the great guardian Markim raised his voice and called for the six swords troop to follow him. With a sharp burst of movement, Markim shot upward into the sky. The six swords followed simultaneously, rising into the air while releasing powerful waves of internal energy. Their target was the dragon's head. All 7 warriors launched their assault together. Hobum initiated his illusion sword technique, while Markim unleashed the 24 demon sword. Countless slashing strikes spread across the dragon's head. Although the head was also protected by thick scales that none of the attacks could penetrate, the dragon roared fiercely as if the relentless blows were still reaching its body. Markim shouted for the attacks to continue. The 6 swords relentlessly aimed at the dragon's head, each warrior unleashing their most powerful sword techniques in an attempt to bring the beast down. Surrounded by their overwhelming assault, the warriors repeatedly created distance before charging again, striking the creature from multiple angles. Watching from afar, Mo Yong-yu stared in amazement. Within his thoughts, he believed that even the dragon turtle would struggle to survive such a devastating assault. It seemed to him that the demonic cult would soon succeed in beheading the creature. The concerns of the general strategist Jigal and his father now appeared unnecessary to him, and he began thinking that the Murim alliance might face greater difficulty instead. With that thought, he considered returning. Just then, a powerful vibration of energy surged through the air. Mo Yong-yu suddenly turned his head, startled by the tremendous force he sensed behind him. The dragon's head, covered in black scales, was beginning to radiate an intense white light light. An enormous amount of true energy was rapidly gathering within it. Seeing the ominous change, Markham urgently shouted for everyone to avoid the attack. The six swords immediately sensed the danger as well. Alarmed by the terrifying energy gathering within the creature, they quickly withdrew from their positions. The power spread outward in every direction, yet the dragon clearly focused its aim toward the location where Chae-Takim and Hobom were positioned. Munku and Ko Wang-hul felt their bodies tremble under the overwhelming pressure of the energy. Realizing the danger, they shouted desperately for Hobom and Chae-Takim. Hobom and Chae-Takim looked toward the dragon's mouth as it opened wide with a terrifying wail. Both of their eyes turned pale as the impending attack approached. A violent roar erupted, and from the dragon's mouth, a beam of pale lightning burst forth and tore through the air. The destructive force ripped across everything in its path, shattering even the clouds above. Wherever the lightning passed, black smoke spread through the air. Its power was so overwhelming that no martial artist could possibly defend against it. Hobom and Chae-Takim, the direct targets of the attack, appeared certain to die. Watching the scene unfold, Munku's eyes reddened as she reached helplessly toward the ground. Despair began to overwhelm her as she struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could happen. Tears were about to spill from her eyes. Then a familiar voice echoed from the distance. The voice declared that he was not dead yet. Startled, Munku turned toward the direction of the voice. Her eyes widened in shock. Hobom and Chae-Takim were both still alive, suspended in the air. Chae-Takim spoke weakly with a pale face, admitting that he had nearly died and expressing his gratitude. Hearing those words, Yowon did not respond. Instead, he stared at the dragon with a serious expression. The creature had already begun gathering energy once more, preparing to unleash another beam of lightning. Fear spread across the faces of those watching as they realized the creature was preparing another attack. At that moment, Hobom and Chae-Takim, who had been suspended in the air, suddenly dropped to the ground, landing heavily as they struggled to regain themselves. Seeing the danger, Markham urgently ordered everyone to drop their weapons and lie flat on the ground. Yowon raised his hand toward it, and cold chi surged upward into the air as hundreds of ice swords materialized around the dragon's head. The dragon's eyes widened with confusion at the sudden formation of weapons around it, yet Yowon showed no hesitation. Clenching his hand firmly, he unleashed the attack. The ice sword shot forward all at once. Hundreds of blades struck the dragon's head and chin simultaneously. The impact forced the dragon's mouth to snap shut before the lightning could be released, causing the attack to vanish before it could form. Watching the scene unfold, the cultists who had fallen to the ground erupted in excited shouts as they realized the lightning beam had been successfully stopped. At the same moment, both Yowon and Markham shouted urgent commands. They ordered everyone to stay down and warned that no one should get up. The dragon roared furiously. With the roar, a violent wave of lightning burst from its body. Startled by the sudden surge, the warriors immediately lowered themselves even further, keeping their bodies below the height of the lightning rods. Just like before, the lightning waves were drawn into the iron rods planted in the ground. However, this time the attack did not end. Unlike the earlier bursts, the dragon turtle continued releasing wave after wave of lightning without pause. Watching the relentless assault, Baekji exclaimed in shock, questioning how long the creature intended to keep attacking since it had never continued its lightning waves for this long before. Within Yowon's mind, Nano delivered a warning that the lightning rods would soon reach their limit and could no longer endure the continuous power. Realizing the danger, Yowon assessed the situation within his thoughts. His original intention had been to defeat the dragon turtle through careful tactics without forcing his forces into excessive risk. However, the creature had proven far stronger than he had expected. If the attack continued at this rate, everyone would eventually be electrocuted. The lightning's range was also too wide for him to counter it with the formless sword. Seeking another solution, he asked Nano whether there was any other way to deal with the lightning. Nano explained that if heat energy became extremely high, the increased vibration of atoms would interfere with the movement of electrons. Yowon asked Nano to explain the concept more simply. Nano clarified that intense heat would reduce the flow of lightning. However, the method carried great danger because the dragon turtle's lightning power was extraordinarily strong. Despite the risk, Yowon decided that there was no other choice. Chae-Takim and the surrounding cultists immediately tried to stop him, warning that it was too dangerous. Yowon calmly told them to move away. When they hesitated in confusion, he made a slight motion with his hand. The warriors around him were instantly pushed back by an invisible force, and shock spread among them. At the same moment, they sensed a terrifying surge of energy spreading outward. A dramatic transformation began within Yowon's body. Black flames erupted across his entire form. The heat radiating from the flames far surpassed anything Hobom had previously demonstrated before his fellow members. The temperature was so intense that simply standing too close to Yowon would be enough to burn them. Within his mind, Chun Yowon realized that the black flames surrounding his body were reducing the effect of the lightning. The current still sent a faint tingling sensation through him, but it remained bearable. The dragon turtle roared fiercely and intensified the lightning pouring from its body, attempting to force Yowon back down. Violent electric currents spread through the battlefield. Almost instantly, nearly half of the lightning rods shattered under the overwhelming energy, burning up in blue flames. With many of the rods destroyed, the remaining ones could no longer absorb the entire attack. The excess lightning surged outward, striking members of the cult standing nearby. Cries of pain erupted as several of them were electrocuted by the stray currents. Inside his mind, Yowon realized that the dragon turtle had sensed the presence of another mythical creature's energy within him, and had begun using even stronger lightning in response. If he did not act quickly, many of his subordinates would die. Black flames gathered within his hand and condensed into the shape of an invisible sword. Within his mind, Yowon resolved that the battle had to end immediately. While the dragon turtle continued releasing waves of electricity, Yowon gathered his internal energy and swung his hand forward. At that instant, the dragon's mouth snapped shut. Seizing the opening, Yowon shot forward like a missile, charging directly toward the creature's head. The black flame sword carved through the dragon's scales as he advanced. Just as he was about to reach the head, the dragon turtle suddenly blinked and glared at him. Seeing the movement, Yowon cursed quietly. Inside the dragon's mouth, a vortex of electricity had been forming the entire time. The creature had deliberately waited for him to approach. Realizing the trap, Yowon immediately attempted to change direction and escape. Within his thoughts, he acknowledged that the dragon had intentionally pretended to fall for his attack. It had lured him closer, revealing intelligence far greater than he had anticipated. But the moment he tried to evade, the dragon turtle roared again. Another blast of lightning erupted from its mouth. In the next instant, Yowon's figure vanished within the blinding light. The members of the demonic cult cried out in horror, shouting desperately for their lord. The lightning beam did not stop after engulfing him. It continued sweeping across the battlefield. The cultists who managed to avoid the attack scattered in every direction, desperately trying to escape the spreading waves of electricity. However, not everyone managed to get away in time. Several warriors were struck by the lightning and screamed in agony. Around 20 members of the force were hit by the attack. Watching the scene unfold, Takim collapsed to his knees in despair. Regret filled his voice as he blamed himself for not stopping Yowon earlier, believing their demon lord had perished. Then suddenly, a voice called out from among the warriors. Everyone turned their frightened gazes toward the direction being pointed out. Through the thick smoke, black flames flickered. The shape within the flames appeared far larger than before. Moments later, realization dawned upon them that their lord was still alive. The cultists who had believed Yowon had died erupted into loud cheers and cries of relief. Within the black flames, Yowon struggled to breathe as he gasped for air. Even he had believed that death was inevitable when the lightning closed in around him, yet somehow he had survived. Nano's voice suddenly sounded within Yowon's mind, reporting that his energy had reached 400% charge. Startled by the unexpected message, Yowon questioned what had happened. Nano explained that determining the exact cause would require further analysis. However, the lightning had been weakened by the intense heat surrounding Yowon's body, and the remaining energy had been absorbed by him as an additional power source. A delighted grin spread across Yowon's face as he understood the implication. If that was the case, he no longer needed to fear the dragon turtle's lightning. Meanwhile, the warriors of the Northern Sea Ice Palace were locked in a fierce battle against another head of the dragon turtle. At the beginning of the confrontation, a single lightning strike from the creature had killed dozens of people instantly. Because of that devastating display of power, the remaining warriors maintained a cautious distance to avoid being struck directly. Dan Juchin unleashed technique after technique. He executed the 1,000 white ice sound and the divine palm of the ice god, sending waves of frost pouring down ground toward the dragon's head. The attack was not his alone. The elders of the Northern Sea Ice Palace joined him, performing the same techniques simultaneously. White frost rained relentlessly upon the creature. The dragon turtle roared. The reaction was not born from pain. Instead, fury surged within the beast as the cold frost reminded it of the icy prison that had confined it for centuries. The dragon responded by releasing lightning from its mouth. Dan Juchin and the elders immediately shifted into defense, channeling their cold chi. As their hands rotated in a clockwise motion, transparent shields of ice formed around their bodies. The lightning crashed against the shields. Though the immense force caused their bodies to be thrown back, the lightning slid away in different directions rather than piercing through. Dan Juchin shouted for everyone to endure. Despite the violent impact, not a single warrior died from the attack. Youngi spoke with heavy breath, acknowledging that using the ice-white space as a defensive technique allowed them to withstand the lightning. Dan Juchin, however, cursed in frustration. Merely defending was meaningless. Out of the original 1,000 warriors, only about a sixth remained alive. They needed a way to kill the creature, not simply endure its attacks. Yet he could not see how they were supposed to pierce the dragon's scales and tear into its flesh. At that moment, a voice reached him through telepathy. Turning toward the direction from which the voice came, Dan Juchin saw Jagal Sohi. Confused by the sudden communication, he listened as she informed him that the dragon turtle's scales possessed a weakness to fire. Dan Juchin frowned as he stared at the dragon, which was releasing smoke from its nostrils. Meanwhile, on the side where the Orthodox faction was fighting the dragon's other head, the battle continued. Warriors repeatedly launched fire arrows at the creature while shouting orders to continue firing. At first, Dan Juchin had doubted the tactic because the arrows appeared unable to penetrate the scales. However, something gradually began to change. As the warriors continued firing the arrows, the lightning emitted by the dragon turtle began to grow weaker. A proud gleam appeared in Mo Kang's eyes as he silently thanked the ancestors of his clan. Until that moment, he had believed the fire arrows were ineffective because they failed to pierce the dragon's scales. Now he realized their true effect. While they did not penetrate deeply, they were weakening the dragon turtle's lightning attacks. Amid the battle, Huang Bo, who had been directing the continuous volleys of fire arrows, suddenly called out to Mo Kang with urgency. He pointed out that one of the arrows had finally become lodged in the dragon's body. Until then, not a single arrow had managed to pierce the creature's scales. This was the first time it had happened during the entire battle. Mo Kang recognized the significance of the moment, yet his thoughts were not entirely triumphant. Inside his mind, he acknowledged that the victory had come at a terrible cost. Nearly half of their forces had already fallen, and their supply of arrows was rapidly running out. Huang Bo suggested that they would need to retrieve the usable arrows scattered across the battlefield if they wished to continue the assault. Mo Kang poured oil over his blade, determination hardening his expression. He declared that it was time to end the battle. Huang Bo noticed the action and questioned whether Mo Kang intended to charge the dragon directly. Mo Kang ignited his sword in flames and turned toward Huang Bo. Acknowledging the risk of the plan, he asked whether Huang Bo would fight alongside him. His intention was clear: to sever the dragon's head before their remaining arrows were exhausted. Huang Bo admitted that although the dragon's lightning had weakened, approaching it directly was still reckless. Nevertheless, he accepted the proposal. He poured oil over his own great sword and ignited it as well. With both blades burning brightly, Huang Bo declared that they needed to act quickly before the flames died out. With a fierce cry, Huang Bo surged forward, and Mo Kang followed him without hesitation. The dragon turtle immediately reacted to the sight of the two warriors rushing toward it with flaming swords. The creature roared loudly, unleashing lightning from its body. At that moment, the warriors of the Orthodox faction shouted commands. They released volleys of fire arrows, aiming to shield their leaders as they advanced. The arrows rained down upon the dragon's head, striking it repeatedly and forcing it to react. Unable to remain still under the barrage, the dragon turtle suddenly dug itself into the ground in an attempt to evade the incoming attacks. Mo Kang shouted in anger, demanding to know whether the creature was attempting to escape. But in the next instant, the beast retaliated. Lightning erupted from beneath the ground, directly beneath the two advancing warriors. The sudden strike blasted Mo Kang and Huang Bo backward with tremendous force. Mo Kang clenched his teeth and endured the pain as he forced himself to keep moving forward. Another bolt of lightning rushed toward him while he was still sliding across the ground, leaving him unable to block the attack. Then, unexpectedly, figures stepped forward in front of the two warriors. Middle-aged men dressed in white fur stood firm, raising ice shields to intercept the lightning. The bolt struck the shields and slid away harmlessly. The ones who had intervened were officials of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. After blocking the attack, they urged the warriors of the Orthodox faction to continue forward. Grateful for the support, Mo Yong-kang and Huang Bo expressed their thanks before rushing ahead once more, their flaming swords still blazing as they pressed toward the dragon turtle. The dragon turtle roared as a blinding flash of light burst from its jaws. In the next instant, the creature detonated a massive bolt of lightning that illuminated the entire battlefield. Mo Yong-kang and Huang Bo pressed forward through the storm of lightning, gritting their teeth as they endured the violent current striking their bodies. Step by step, they forced themselves closer to the monster. At last, they reached striking distance. With fierce determination, both warriors drove their flaming swords forward, pouring every ounce of strength into the attack as they cursed the creature and demanded its death. Their blades slashed forward. For the first time in the battle, the swords pierced through the scales that had seemed completely impenetrable. A thunderous scream erupted from the dragon turtle as its long neck twisted violently in agony. The desperate gamble had succeeded. Both warriors' blades cut deeply into the creature's thick neck at the same time. With a powerful strike, the neck was severed. The massive head crashed to the ground. The warriors of the Orthodox faction stared in stunned disbelief at the fallen head of the dragon. When the light finally faded from its eyes, realization spread among them. A thunderous cheer erupted. They shouted triumphantly that they had slain a dragon. The two warriors who had achieved the feat dropped to the ground in exhaustion after beheading the creature that had devastated the battlefield. Huang Bo grinned with relief, breathing heavily as he admitted that he truly believed he would die during the fight. Even now, he found it hard to believe that Mo Yong-kang's daring plan had actually worked. Completely drained, Huang Bo collapsed onto the ground and raised his hand weakly toward Mo Yong-kang, smiling with satisfaction. At that moment, a heavy sound echoed. A strange, viscous liquid began dripping across the ground. Mo Yong-kang shouted urgently and rushed toward Huang Bo as he realized the danger. Then it happened. A devastating bolt of lightning descended. The attack pierced straight through Huang Bo's chest. When the lightning passed, nothing remained but scorched black soot. Mo Yong-kang cried out in anguish as he watched his comrade vanish. At the same time, on the northwest side of the Ice Palace, another astonishing scene was unfolding. Ko Wang-hurl stared in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. Even after everything he had seen before, this spectacle seemed impossible. Baekji acknowledged that Yoan continued to astonish them every single time. Munku watched with shining eyes, realizing that their demon lord was absorbing the power of the dragon turtle itself. Yoan stood amid the storm of lightning, drawing in the dragon's lightning chi. The immense energy, which had surged to 4 times its normal level, was being rapidly absorbed into his body. Nano's voice echoed within Yoan's mind, reporting that his energy charge had reached 500%. At that moment, Yoan waved his hand. The roaring dragon turtle suddenly had its jaws forced shut. Confused by the sudden restraint, the creature attempted to open its mouth again, but only muffled sounds escaped. A faint smile appeared on Yoan's face as he mockingly urged the creature to try again. He raised his energy further, and the dragon's jaws clamped down with such overwhelming force that blood burst from its mouth. Yoan lifted his hand once more. A fallen sword nearby rose into the air and turned toward the beast. Black flames manifested around it, forming an invisible sword of blazing energy. Yoan called Nano. Nano immediately confirmed that the target had been locked and announced that 200% of the collected energy would be concentrated into the attack. With a sinister grin, Yoan issued the command to fire. The sword shot forward like a tracer bullet. The dragon turtle's eyes widened as the projectile rushed toward it. The strike landed instantly. The blazing blade pierced straight through the creature's neck as black flames erupted across its massive body. The dragon's head separated and fell heavily to the ground. Witnessing the sight, the warriors of the demonic cult erupted into cheers. They shouted in triumph, praising the Sky Demon Order and calling out to Lord Chun as they celebrated Yoan, who had severed the dragon's head with a single strike. The tornado of black flames surrounding Yoan slowly faded away. Inside his mind, Nano informed informed him that the remaining energy was rapidly decreasing. Yo-won realized that the power was draining extremely quickly because the amount of energy far exceeded what his body normally held. As the true energy left him at such speed, a deep exhaustion began settling over him. Within his thoughts, he concluded that the immediate threat had been dealt with. Before he could finish that thought, Munku's urgent shout reached him from behind. Yo-won responded with a reassuring smile, beginning to say that there was no need to worry. Before he could complete the sentence, black flames suddenly surged around his body again. At that moment, a strange liquid began falling over him. Confused, Yo-won raised his head. Then shocked cries erupted from all around him. People shouted that the dragon was still alive. A brilliant white flash of condensed lightning surged from the mouth of the creature that had just regenerated. Yo-won instantly raised his energy as the black flames around him formed a defensive shield. Munku cried out in horror as dread spread through the members of the demonic cult. Disbelief and terror filled their voices as they struggled to comprehend the nightmare before them. The severed dragon's head had regenerated. From the torn neck, a new head formed rapidly, its scales appearing lighter than those of the original. The strange liquid continued oozing from the regenerated flesh. Shock spread among the warriors as they witnessed the creature's terrifying regenerative power. Realizing the truth, Yo-won acknowledged that the monster was truly immortal. Nano suggested using the most efficient defensive mechanism. Yo-won responded with disbelief, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. The dragon's head had been completely destroyed, yet it had regenerated as though nothing had happened. As he scanned the battlefield, Yo-won noticed something else. The Murm Alliance had also managed to slay one of the dragon's heads, yet that head had regenerated as well. He immediately understood that the same must also be happening with the head currently fighting the warriors of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The realization deepened. If every head of the dragon turtle possessed the same regenerative ability, then defeating it by severing its heads would accomplish nothing. Suddenly, another thought struck him. As Yo-won looked around the battlefield, he realized that one of the creature's heads was missing from sight. Yo-won placed both palms firmly on the ground. Seeing his action, the concerned cultists shouted urgently, warning him that the dragon was about to unleash another attack and urging him to move away. Despite their cries, Yo-won ignored them and concentrated on the sensations traveling through the earth beneath his hand. A powerful rhythm echoed from deep underground. The beating grew stronger and faster, as if something buried below was becoming excited. Realization dawned within his mind. He suddenly rose and shot past the dragon turtle's head. Yo-won moved toward the central point between the three locations where the dragon's heads had emerged, directly above the ruined remains of the Ice Palace. The heartbeat beneath the ground grew clearer. At that spot, the pulsation felt the strongest. Yo-won immediately understood that the creature's true body was hidden beneath that exact point. Within his mind, he asked Nano how much true energy remained. Nano responded that the remaining charge had fallen to 154%. Yo-won realized that the amount was insufficient. Even if he used every bit of his strength, the attack would not rival the power of his previous strike. With that level of energy, he would not be able to reach the dragon turtle's true body hidden deep underground. He concluded that he needed far greater power. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the battlefield, Moyang Kang struggled violently as he demanded to be released, insisting that he had to kill the monster. One of his subordinates restrained him desperately, warning that pushing himself any further would be dangerous. Nearby, members of the Huangbo clan knelt beside the spot where their leader had fallen, tears streaming down their faces. On another front, Dan Juchin faced one of the dragon's heads while clenching his teeth in frustration. Unable to comprehend the creature's regenerative ability, he cursed angrily at the seemingly endless power that allowed the beast to restore itself again and again. Across the battlefield, despair spread among the warriors as they questioned how such a monster could ever be killed. At that same moment, Yo-won suddenly soared into the air. Hovering above the shattered ruins of the Ice Palace, he unleashed two black flame swords simultaneously toward two of the dragon's heads. The attack immediately drew the creature's attention. All three heads of the dragon turtle turned toward Yo-won. With a casual motion, Yo-won flicked his palm, signaling for them to come at him. Watching from afar, Dan Jushin stared in confusion as he recognized the leader of the demonic cult. He struggled to understand what Yo-won was attempting. In In response, 3 streams of lightning erupted from different directions. Each one targeted Yowon, who hovered in the air surrounded by black flames. Nano immediately issued a warning, explaining that the action was not recommended because too many unpredictable variables were involved. The maneuver posed an extremely high risk to Yowon's body. Yowon dismissed the concern, calmly remarking that it was not a serious problem. Nano advised him to move far away from the area. Ignoring the warning completely, Yowon steadied his stance as black flames surged around his body. At the same moment, the 3 bolts of lightning struck him simultaneously. The collision exploded with a deafening sonic boom. A blinding flash filled the sky as the massive surge of energy engulfed the entire battlefield. Dan Juchin stared at the battlefield in dread as the terrifying attack unfolded. The immense power of the lightning strike shook him deeply, and he could not understand why the leader of the demonic cult had not moved to evade it. Within the blinding flash of light, Chun Yo-won calmly issued a command. Nano confirmed that the target had been acquired. At Yo-won's order, 3 invisible swords engulfed in black flames shot forward simultaneously. The blades pierced straight through the raging lightning chi and struck the necks of the dragon turtle's 3 heads with lethal precision. In a single decisive motion, all 3 heads were severed at once. A stunned silence spread across the space, as if even the air itself had frozen in disbelief. The enormous heads of the dragon turtle crashed to the ground before the 3 factions. Confused murmurs quickly followed as people struggled to understand what had just happened. For the first time, the severed heads showed no sign of regeneration. Moyong Kang stared in disbelief. Yo-won had survived such an overwhelming attack, and in the same instant had slain all 3 heads of the dragon turtle. The sight seemed impossible, forcing Moyong Kang to question whether the demonic cult leader was even human. At that moment, Yo-won had absorbed the lightning chi that had been directed at him, converting the energy into his own true energy. However, his condition was far from stable. Blood escaped from his mouth as he coughed violently. Nano reported that the energy charge had surged to 1,200%, but warned that the user was now in extreme danger. Yo-won calmly asked Nano to endure a little longer. Watching the scene, Hobum felt tears fill his eyes as pride swelled inside him. Chae-takim, however, noticed something alarming. Despite the overwhelming flames surrounding Yo-won, his condition clearly appeared unstable. Hobum also realized the same truth. The black flames were stronger than ever, yet their demon lord himself seemed dangerously weakened. At that moment, a telepathic message reached Hobum from Yo-won. Yo-won informed him that the dragon turtle's lightning was weak against fire and heat. If anything were to happen, Hobum was to protect the members of the cult. Startled by the sudden responsibility, Hobum stammered in confusion, struggling to understand what Yo-won meant by if anything happens. Yo-won simply looked at him and smiled. With quiet confidence, he expressed that he believed in Hobum. Hearing those words, Hobum accepted the responsibility as flames ignited around his hands. Declaring his readiness, he prepared himself to act. At that moment, Yo-won made his move. The wreckage scattered across the battlefield began to tremble. Amid the rubble, swords belonging to both fallen and surviving warriors suddenly lifted from the ground. Yo-won's internal energy surged violently as hundreds of swords were drawn toward him. Black flames swirled more fiercely around his body. With cold determination, Yo-won declared that he would return exactly what had been inflicted upon them. Dan Juchin and the elders of the Northern Sea Ice Palace stared in astonishment at the phenomenon unfolding before their eyes. Fear spread through Moyong Kang as he struggled to understand Yo-won's intention. For a moment, he wondered whether the demonic cult leader intended to destroy everyone present, while they were already exhausted from battling the dragon turtle. Before the thought could settle, Jigal Sohee interrupted. She reminded them that the dragon turtle had not yet been fully defeated. The 4th head still remained. At that realization, the truth struck them. Yo-won was targeting the hidden head. All eyes turned toward him. Yo-won stretched out his hand and instructed Nano to lock onto the targets. Nano activated the multi-target locking system, though its voice crackled with strain as the augmented targeting trajectories filled Yo-won's vision. Then Yo-won roared with fury and issued the command. At once, the swords shot forward. Black flame blades combined with lightning energy poured down like a devastating storm. The ground shook violently as explosions tore across the battlefield, splitting the earth apart. A monstrous scream erupted from beneath the ground. Unlike the cries of the previous heads, this roar was deeper and far more terrifying. Panic spread as warriors shouted for everyone to move away, warning that anyone too close would be caught in the destructive attack. Yet Dan Yuchen did not move. He stood frozen in stunned silence as he watched the rain of black flame swords obliterate the entire area. Dan Yuchen stared at the destruction unfolding before him and spoke in disbelief about the ice palace that had stood for 700 years. Nearby, Jagal Sohi turned toward Moyong Kang and questioned whether the technique they were witnessing was the Heaven Flash. Moyong Kang trembled as he watched the scene, shaking his head as he denied it. The technique he had once witnessed in Jin Castle of the Tongho region, the attack that had earned Chun Yo-won the title of Demon God and had drowned the entire fortress in blood and death, was far weaker than what he was seeing now. Compared to the present attack, that past display seemed inferior. Nano's strained voice echoed within Yo-won's mind, reporting that the remaining charged energy had fallen to 335%. Yo-won felt his strength fading rapidly. Within his mind, he realized that nearly 70% of his true energy had already been consumed. A heavy dizziness overtook him, and he felt as if he might lose consciousness at any moment. At that moment, something unexpected occurred. A deep rumble shook the battlefield. The ground trembled violently beneath everyone's feet. The dragon turtle, which had fought using only its heads until now, sensed the crisis and finally began moving its true body. Cracks spread across the earth and ominous sparks began erupting from within them. Lightning surged upward from the shattered ground. Even those who tried to fly away from the cracking earth were not entirely safe. Bolts of lightning burst upward, striking many of the warriors. Screams of agony filled the air as people were electrocuted. Instead of continuing the fight, many warriors focused only on escaping and protecting themselves. Members of the demonic cult struggled to avoid the spreading lightning, yet several of them were still caught in its path. Suddenly, a surge of flames erupted and intercepted the incoming lightning. Hobum stood at the center of the flames. His fire chi burst outward, countering the lightning attacks rushing toward the cult members. Observing the situation, Markham sensed something unusual. The dragon turtle's roar sounded less like fury and more like agony. The sudden, uncontrollable bursts of lightning resembled the convulsions of a creature in pain. He concluded with certainty that the demon lord's attack had struck the true head of the dragon turtle. Inside Yo-won's mind, Nano's voice continued to break apart as it reported the remaining energy levels. The instability of Nano's voice revealed that the system itself was under immense strain. Yo-won realized that the Heaven Flash technique had consumed far more internal energy than any other method he had used before. Combined with Nano's assistance, the energy was draining at a terrifying speed, leaving him dizzy and exhausted. The numbers displayed in his augmented vision continued to drop rapidly. At that moment, the final head of the dragon turtle burst out from the cracked earth. The creature roared defiantly. Gathering the last of his strength, Yo-won circulated every remaining fragment of his true energy into one final attack. With rage and agony erupting from his voice, he shouted for the creature to die. He launched a single black flame sword, wrapped in lightning and powered by more than twice the force of his remaining true energy. The blazing streak tore through the sky. In the next instant, the attack pierced the fourth and final head of the dragon turtle. The strike detonated with a thunderous explosion. A massive wave of black flames spread across the battlefield. At last, the dragon turtle was destroyed. The black flames surrounding Yo-won gradually faded away. As his energy dissipated, the rubble and weapons that had been suspended in the air fell back to the ground. Relief washed over Yo-won as he wiped the sweat from his face. A roar of celebration erupted from the cultists as they witnessed their demon lord finally defeat the dragon turtle. Even the warriors of the Orthodox faction felt joy at the outcome. The members of the Six Swords cried out with overwhelming excitement. They shouted praises for the heavenly demon divine cult as victory spread across the battlefield. Chun Yo-won released a quiet sigh. Within his mind, relief surfaced as he acknowledged that the battle had ended just before his true energy had completely run out. He expressed silent gratitude toward Nano, recognizing that without its assistance, he would never have achieved victory. Yet something suddenly felt wrong. Nano's voice echoed faintly within his mind, reporting an overload in the energy system. The message broke apart as it explained that self-recovery and a system update were required, forcing the system into standby for a period of time. A final mechanical sound followed, and then Nano's voice disappeared. The augmented reality that had filled Yo-won's vision with white particles faded instantly. Startled, Yo-won called out repeatedly for Nano, and no response came. The silence felt as though Nano had ceased to exist. At that moment, blood burst from Yo-won's mouth as violent coughing overtook him. An unbearable pain spread throughout his entire body. The agony did not come from strained muscles, but from the meridian pathways through which his chi flowed. The pain made his body flinch uncontrollably. Because the flow of chi inside him had become unstable, Yo-won could no longer maintain his flight. A sharp cry escaped him as his body lost balance. With nothing supporting him, Yo-won fell from the sky like a meteor and crashed heavily onto the ground. Seeing this, the cultists rushed toward him in alarm. They called out to their lord, asking whether he was all right. Yo-won's body trembled violently. The meridians throughout his body felt as if they were about to tear apart, and the vessels that once carried his chi now felt completely empty. Hobam hurried closer, offering to support him. Another violent cough escaped Yo-won. Suddenly, sparks burst outward from his body. The sparks rapidly transformed into crackling lightning. Startled by the violent discharge, Hobam and Markim instantly leapt backward as electricity erupted around Yo-won. Hobam stared in confusion, unable to understand what was happening. Markim realized that the lightning made it impossible to approach Yo-won safely. Meanwhile, Yo-won's body convulsed violently. Within his mind, he realized that the pain was likely the consequence of using a technique far beyond the limits of his body. The pressure surging through his meridians felt as though his veins were about to rip apart. Watching in distress, Moonku anxiously asked the head guardian what was happening to their demon lord. Markham concluded that the cause likely lay in the lightning beams previously unleashed by the dragon turtle's 3 heads. Yo-won had absorbed those beams and converted them into true energy, and the overwhelming power now seemed to be producing severe consequences. Within his thoughts, Hobam also understood the situation. The attack Yo-won had used far exceeded the normal output of the Heavenly Flash technique. By drawing upon the power of a mythical creature, he had pushed himself beyond his limits, and even someone like him could not avoid the toll of such power. Moonku asked desperately how they could help him. At that moment, Mongmu stepped forward and offered to try forcing the lightning chi out of Yo-won's body. Before anyone could act, however, Yo-won, who had kept his eyes shut until then, let out a strained groan. Breathing heavily, he warned everyone not to come any closer. Chun Yo-won lifted his hazy gaze and looked around. The corpse of the dragon turtle lay nearby, while members of the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace stood around the battlefield, watching the aftermath. At that moment, sparks of lightning crackled again around Yo-won's body. Soon after, he lowered himself into a lotus position on the ground, while chi continued to emanate from his body. With strained breath, Yo-won declared that he would begin circulating his internal energy and ordered the others to protect him while he did so. Meanwhile, Moyonkong sent a telepathic message, observing that something appeared to be wrong with the demonic cult leader, Jigal, so he responded in agreement, noting that Yo-won seemed noticeably weaker. Hearing Yo-won's intention, the 6th Elder Mong Mu immediately protested. Attempting to stabilize his internal energy in the middle of the battlefield was extremely dangerous. If an enemy attacked during that moment, the Demon Lord would be defenseless. Before Mong Mu could continue, Markim gave a firm command. He ordered the Six Swords troop to form a protective circle around the Demon Lord. The warriors immediately acknowledged the command. Mong Mu objected again, still worried about the situation. Markim calmly reminded him that the Demon Lord's orders were absolute, yet Mong Mu continued to worry. If the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace decided to join forces and attack them, the demonic cult would be placed in an extremely dangerous position. Markim responded calmly that the Demon Lord was certainly aware of that possibility. Confused, Mong Mu asked what he meant. Markim explained that everyone present was a martial artist of the Zhonghu. Before them now lay the corpse of a mythical creature, its essence, core, and blood capable of greatly increasing internal energy. He asked Mong Mu to consider carefully what such a treasure meant to martial artists. Chetakim understood the implication. If Markim was correct, the other factions would inevitably attempt to seize the dragon turtle's blood and essence core for themselves. He wondered whether it was truly wise for them to simply stand guard. Turning toward Hobam, Chetakim questioned whether he truly did not care that others might take the dragon turtle's blood, expecting him to be furious about it. Hobam simply chuckled. With a casual tone, he remarked that it was never a good idea to eat things that had fallen onto the ground. Markeem's prediction was quickly becoming reality. The warriors of the Orthodox Murim began staring at the dragon turtle's blood with growing interest. Voices filled with excitement and greed spread among them as they observed the dark liquid. They spoke in awe that this was truly the blood of the dragon turtle. Some recalled the legends claiming that those who consumed the blood or essence core of a mythical creature would experience an immense increase in chi. Others murmured that such an opportunity came only once in a lifetime. Even a single great rejuvenation pill from the Shaolin Temple could spark a war across the Jianghu, and yet the blood of a mythical creature lay before them. Some imagined that consuming it might grant them the power of the dragon turtle itself. Greed began to shine openly in their eyes. The first person to step forward toward the blood was Jeol Im-young, the leader of the Black Shadow Squad's third team. Before he could proceed any further, Mo-young Kang raised his voice and ordered him to stop. He warned that no ordinary body could withstand consuming the pure blood of a mythical creature. Jeol Im-young questioned how Mo-young Kang could know such a thing. Mo-young Kang revealed that his clan's ancestors had once captured a dragon turtle long ago. Hearing this, Im-young assumed that the Mo-young clan must know a safe method for consuming the creature's blood or essence core. Mo-young Kang shook his head and admitted that unfortunately they did not. Im-young struggled to understand how that could be possible if Mo-young Kang's ancestors had successfully captured the beast. Mo-young Kang's expression hardened as he explained what had happened. According to the ancient records of his clan, the dragon turtle's essence core had been stolen shortly after its capture. The core was described as a concentration of the creature's lightning energy, wrapped in blue flames so intense that no one could even touch it. Because of this, they had been searching for a way to transport it safely. Before they could do so, the core vanished. The clan had dispatched warriors to track down the thief, but every one of them was killed by a martial master unknown to the Jianghu. Eventually, the clan gathered all of its remaining forces and managed to corner the culprit in a mountain valley. Yet even then, the mysterious man vanished without a trace, as if he had disappeared into the heavens themselves. Im-young listened with surprise and remarked that the story resembled the legend of the Berserk Saber connected to the 6 martial arts sects. Mo-young Kang acknowledged the similarity and began mentioning that the event had taken place around the time the Heavenly Demon Divine cult had first been established. Before he could finish speaking, a violent surge of lightning suddenly erupted behind them. Everyone turned in shock. One of the warriors had secretly drunk the raw blood of the dragon turtle. His body began convulsing violently. In the next instant, his head exploded. His body tore apart as sparks of lightning burst outward from within him. The surrounding warriors stared in terror, realizing that Mo-young Kang's warning had been completely correct. The dragon turtle's blood was far too powerful for an ordinary body to endure. Fearful voices rose as people questioned whether there was any safe way to consume such power. Meanwhile, Jeol Im-young clenched his teeth in frustration. Inside his mind, anger boiled. They had risked their lives to slay the dragon turtle, yet now it seemed they would gain nothing from it. After coming so far, he refused to return empty-handed. Others, however, were worried about something entirely different. One of the warriors from the Orthodox faction urgently called out to Mo-young Kang, insisting that this was their chance. The members of the Black Shadow forces, who had lost their leader Kang So, strongly demanded revenge against Chun Yo-won. Right before their eyes, the demonic cult leader had collapsed after exhausting his strength. They believed there would never be a better chance to strike. Mo-young Kang, however, shook his head firmly and rejected their request. Confused voices demanded to know why. If they could kill Yo-won now, they could avenge their fallen leader and remove a dangerous figure for the future of Zhongyuan. Mo-young Kang explained that a similar situation had occurred once before. The warriors listened in confusion. He reminded them of the battle at Jin Castle, where Yo-won had used the Heaven Flash technique. At that time, everyone believed that Yo-won had completely exhausted his internal energy. Thinking him defenseless, the masters of the Berserk Saber attempted to take advantage of the moment. Mo-young Kang then revealed the result of that decision. Every one of them died, and not a single person survived. Shock spread among the listeners. Mo-young Kang continued, stating that Chun Yo-won was not someone who could easily be defeated. Even in moments when he appeared vulnerable, he would always devise a method to deceive and destroy his enemies. He then asked them to consider the current situation carefully. Even if they attempted an attack, could they break through the defensive formation of the demonic cult? Compared to the Orthodox faction, the demonic cult had suffered far fewer losses during the battle. The Orthodox forces had already lost around 400 men. Meanwhile, the demonic cult still retained retained more than 500 warriors, along with the 6 swords and the Great Guardian, all of whom remained largely unharmed. If a battle broke out now, the Orthodox faction would likely suffer devastating losses. Despite this reasoning, Jeo Lim-young continued to protest. He suggested another option. They could ally with the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Turning toward the temporary leader of the Black Shadow Squad, Mek Yijong, Im-young asked for his opinion. Mek Yijong had been silently listening to the entire discussion. After considering the situation, he admitted that the Northern Sea Ice Palace still retained a significant portion of its forces. If they cooperated and managed to break through the demonic cult's defensive formation, while he personally held off the Dark King, it might be possible. Encouraged by this answer, Im-young quickly supported the idea and urged them to move forward with the plan. Before he could continue, however, Mek Yijong raised a hand and pointed toward the distance. He explained that the Northern Sea Ice Palace seemed to be focused on something completely different. When the warriors looked in the direction he indicated, they saw the surviving members of the Ice Palace gathering in one area. Their destination was the massive, headless body of the dragon turtle. Their leader, Dan Juchin, approached the corpse and used his ice chi to freeze the creature's blood. After examining it, Dan Juchin confirmed that the blood of a mythical creature could not be consumed safely in its pure form and would need to be diluted. Youngie suggested that freezing it first might weaken the lightning energy contained within the blood. However, he pointed out that while the blood was valuable, the essence core of the dragon turtle was far more important. Since the demonic cult had not taken action and the Morim Alliance remained undecided, this could be their chance to seize the core. Hearing this, Dan Juchin immediately issued orders. He instructed squad leader Bake to hurry to the 5th Elder, who was stationed on Sealed Turtle Mountain. Then he ordered the others to follow him through the path the dragon turtle had created beneath the ground. Frost Sword Squad leader Bake Go-jung acknowledged the command without hesitation. As Dan Juchin began preparing further instructions, he suddenly paused and looked around. Realizing someone was missing, he asked where the 6th Elder had gone. Meanwhile, tension was rising again among the warriors of the Orthodox faction. Some argued that killing the demonic cult leader should be their first priority. Others insisted that obtaining the dragon turtle's essence core was far more important. Amid the heated debate, one warrior suddenly ran toward Moyang Kang with urgency. Breathing heavily, he reported that the Northern Sea Ice Palace forces had already begun moving underground. Moyang Kang was taken aback as the report reached him. Within his mind, the realization struck sharply. The Northern Sea Ice Palace must be heading for the dragon turtle's essence core. That left them with no choice. Although he remained wary of the demonic cult leader, the situation demanded immediate action. Moyang Kang raised his voice and ordered his forces to move quickly. He declared that they would be the ones to secure the dragon turtle's essence core. Jigal Sohee objected immediately, reminding him that they had no safe method of consuming such a dangerous power. Moyang Kang answered coldly that if they could not use it, they would destroy it. Jigal Sohee was stunned by the suggestion. Moyang Kang explained that it would be far better to eradicate the essence core than to allow it to fall into the hands of the demonic cult leader. They had all witnessed Chun Yo-won's terrifying strength. Within her mind, Jigal Sohee admitted that his reasoning was correct. Yo-won already seemed to stand among the strongest martial artists in the world. If he were to absorb the dragon turtle's essence core on top of that, the balance of power within the Jianghu would collapse completely. Accepting the decision, she declared her understanding. Moyang Kang ordered her to follow him. She agreed and prepared to move. As Moyang Kang looked around to give further orders, he suddenly noticed someone missing. Squad leader Mek Yijong was nowhere to be seen. One of the warriors reported that Mek Yijong had already departed with several other squad leaders to retrieve the essence core. The news shocked Moyang Kang. The action had occurred only moments earlier, yet no report had been made to him. His expression darkened with frustration. Without wasting another moment, he quickly led his forces toward the underground opening. At the same time, another group was also rushing underground. Under the command of squad leader Bake Go-jung, members of the Northern Sea Ice Palace hurried into the cavern where the elders had been stationed. However, the moment they descended into the cave, something felt wrong. A strange smell filled the air. Oh Young reported that the scent of blood was coming from deeper inside the cavern. An uneasy chill ran down Bake Go-jung's spine as they continued downward. When they reached the lowest level, the sight before them left him in shock. The 500 warriors who had been guarding the Adelaria stones were all dead. Their bodies lay scattered across the cavern floor, and the area was filled with signs of a fierce battle. The wounds carved across the corpses suggested that they had fought against an armed group of intruders. While examining the scene, Oh Young suddenly called out to Baek Go-jung. He had discovered footprints leading away from the battlefield. The tracks led directly toward the massive tunnel that the dragon turtle had created. It appeared that someone had infiltrated the area during the chaos of the battle above and had escaped into the underground passage. Go-jung clenched his teeth in anger as he realized what had happened. Forcing himself to remain calm, he quickly gave an order. Oh Young was to return immediately and report the situation to the palace master. When Oh Young hesitated and asked about his leader's intentions, Baek Go-jung explained that he would pursue the intruders himself. Only by tracking them could the truth be revealed. Oh Young finally obeyed and hurried back toward the surface. After watching him leave, Go-jung entered the tunnel alone. He rushed through the dark passage, searching for any sign of the intruders. For a long time, he found nothing. Then he noticed faint light shining from the far end of the tunnel. Realizing he was close to catching up with them, Go-jung slowed his steps and became cautious. If they could see the light as well, they might also detect his approach. He prepared himself mentally, planning to collapse the tunnel with the ice-white divine palm at the right moment to block their escape. Just then, a faint rustling sound echoed behind him. Go-jung paused as his thoughts churned with suspicion. Before he could react, a masked figure emerged silently from the shadows behind him. The attacker moved instantly. Blood splashed across the tunnel and a scream echoed through the darkness as the walls of the passage were painted crimson red. Lightning chi surged through the meridians of Chun Yo-won's body. Crackling energy flowed violently within him as he focused deeply on controlling his breathing in order to restrain it. Moonku watched him anxiously. 2 full hours had already passed, yet the lightning energy inside his body showed no sign of weakening. Normally, Yo-won would have completed his chi cultivation by now, but the dragon turtle's power appeared far more difficult to handle than expected. Inside his mind, Yo-won struggled with the overwhelming heat of the lightning energy. It felt as though the power was hot enough to burn through his veins. He forced himself to concentrate, trying to synchronize the flow of the lightning chi with his own heavenly demonic chi while protecting his extraordinary 8 meridians. The process was exhausting. His cultivation itself was slowing down because most of his focus was being spent preventing the lightning energy from destroying his meridians. Within his thoughts, he realized that the task would have been far easier if Nano had been able to activate its self-remediation functions to protect his body. A lingering doubt surfaced inside him. He wondered if Nano had truly disappeared. Yo-won silently called out to it again and there was still no response. Then something changed. Although his eyes remained closed, his pupils suddenly detected white particles of light. The familiar augmented reality interface appeared once more. Relief surged through Yo-won as he believed Nano had returned. However, Nano's voice sounded unstable and distorted. It reported that a system restoration had occurred following an overload error and that a manual lock had been undone. Concern immediately filled Yo-won as he questioned what Nano meant and whether the system itself was functioning properly. A display appeared in his vision. It showed that memory sectors labeled 1 and 2 had previously been locked. Moments later, the interface turned green as the locks were removed. Nano then announced that the lock on the black box video had been undone. Before Yo-won could ask further questions, Nano's voice abruptly cut off again. The augmented reality interface expanded into a space Yo-won had never seen before. The phenomenon resembled the 3-dimensional augmented reality Nano had used once in the past. A completely unfamiliar world appeared before him. Numerous devices filled the surroundings, each projecting 3-dimensional images. The entire area was packed with strange machines, unlike anything Yo-won had ever encountered. Confusion filled his thoughts as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The walls were neither wood nor stone, but smooth metallic surfaces. Translucent objects floated throughout the room, resembling the system windows produced by Nano. He wanted to move and inspect the place more closely, yet he found that his body could not move at all. Inside his mind, questions surged endlessly as he demanded to know where he was and what Nano meant by unlocking the black box. He called Nano again and again, and there was still no response. Then a door embedded in the metal wall suddenly split open. 2 men entered the room. One appeared to be a young man in his early 30s, while the other was a middle-aged man dressed in white clothing resembling a coat. Their outfits looked completely unfamiliar. The middle-aged man spoke first, addressing the younger one as Director Chun. He criticized the director for being stubborn, suggesting that if a nano machine had been implanted into the eye, they could simply distribute special glasses to prevent prevent vision problems. The younger man responded dismissively, arguing that such a solution was unacceptable. He explained that identity chips were dangerous, and that once a person had a nano machine implanted, tracking by the organization known as TP would become far easier. Listening to their conversation, Yo-won grew increasingly confused. Within his mind, he wondered who these people were and where he had been taken. They were speaking about nano machines, which seemed to refer to Nano itself, and they mentioned something called TP that he could not understand. Dr. Bake then continued the discussion by asking whether there was truly no way to remove the identity chip. He explained that dialysis could remove the chip, but warned that the process might also cause the loss of martial arts abilities. Director Chun responded with hesitation, clearly reluctant to accept such a consequence. Hearing the mention of martial arts shocked Yo-won even more. The place he was seeing did not resemble Jongyuan at all, yet the conversation suggested that martial arts existed there as well. Within his thoughts, Yo-won wondered whether the man they called Director Chun might also belong to the Jonghu. Dr. Bake explained that the identity chip already contained an EMP canceller specifically designed to counter attempts like the ones Director Chun was suggesting. Director Chun then wondered if an electromagnetic pulse could still be used to disable it. Dr. Bake repeated that the chip had already been protected against such measures because people like Director Chun had attempted similar ideas before. Director Chun proposed another method, whether it might be possible to destroy the chip through electrical shock. Dr. Bake calmly responded that it would require more than 10 million volts to break it. He added that if Director Chun truly wished to attempt such a method, it would likely result in his death. Even if he somehow succeeded, any abnormality in the chip would immediately notify the government. Director Chun sighed and acknowledged that the authorities would eventually discover him anyway. In that case, he admitted that he could not avoid being hunted by the organization called TP. Realizing that arguing further with Dr. Bake would produce no useful outcome, Director Chun began walking slowly around the room. Eventually, he approached the side where Yo-won's field of vision was positioned. At that moment, Yo-won finally noticed something strange. The young man's face bore an uncanny resemblance to his own. Surprised, Yo-won watched as the man suddenly stretched his hand into the space within Yo-won's vision. The young man lifted something invisible and held it delicately between his fingers. Although Yo-won could not see it clearly, he sensed a strange liquid-like presence being handled in front of him. Director Chun revealed that the object was a 7th generation nano machine. He laughed with excitement as he described it as the pinnacle of modern science. A nano machine that even TP would be unable to track. According to him, releasing such a discovery would guarantee a Nobel Prize. Dr. Bake dismissed the idea with a snort, pointing out that the machine had been created through illegal research and rare metals obtained through theft. Director Chun laughed again, admitting that the doctor was correct. He tried to recall the name of one of the materials involved, mentioning that it began with the letter G. Then he asked whether there were any additional supplies of it and whether another nanomachine could be produced. Dr. Bake firmly responded that the 7th generation nanomachine was unique. There was only one in the entire world. Listening to their conversation, Yo-won struggled to understand most of what they were discussing. However, he grasped one crucial fact. Nano had been created by these people. The question that troubled him was how such a machine had ended up inside his body. Director Chun then announced that it was time for him to prepare. Dr. Bake questioned whether he was truly serious. Director Chun confirmed with clear excitement that he intended to deliver the nano machine to someone living in the past. Hearing those words shocked Yo-won. Dr. Bake warned that the machine might be able to survive the magnetic fields inside a time portal, since it represented the peak of modern science. However, giving such technology to someone in the past would be extremely dangerous. Director Chun responded that he had already anticipated this concern. Most of the nanomachine's dangerous functions had been locked to prevent misuse. Dr. Bake asked whether Director Chun still believed he should have stopped them during the era of the demonic South Master or the arm-severing demon emperor. Hearing the title demonic South Master immediately caught Yo-won's attention. That had been his father's title. However, the title arm-severing demon emperor was unfamiliar to him, and he could not understand who Dr. Bake was referring to when he spoke about them. Dr. Bake continued explaining that even if Director Chun succeeded in altering the past, it would simply create a new branch in the timeline, a separate future that would not affect the present world. Director Chun acknowledged that he understood this theory, but then he he asked how Dr. Bake would explain the evidence he had discovered. He pulled out a small device and pressed it. A bright hologram immediately formed in the air. Dr. Bake looked at it in confusion and asked what it was. Director Chun answered with a serious voice. The image represented the strongest living being in history, a hero who had prevented the downfall of humanity 6 different times alone, a guiding figure of history who had lived for an entire 1,000 years. A date of birth appeared on the holographic screen, born in AD 1967. Director Chun pointed at the information and remarked on how strange it was. He questioned how any human could possibly live for more than 1,000 years. According to Dr. Bake, the man displayed in the records was a living legend who had reached the nature realm, a level of martial mastery that no one else had ever attained. At that stage, a martial artist could absorb chi directly from nature and achieve immortality. Yet Director Chun questioned whether there was even enough natural energy left on the planet for such a feat. Dr. Bake responded that he had no understanding of martial arts and could not explain how such things worked. Director Chun admitted that he did not fully understand it either. As far as he knew, martial arts were steadily declining. The remaining knowledge had largely fallen under the monopoly of Blade 6. The name immediately startled Chun Yo-won. Dr. Bake then demanded to know what Director Chun was trying to prove. Without answering directly, Director Chun pointed toward the holographic image. The projection showed the face of a middle-aged man with thick eyebrows and sharp, powerful features. More images appeared beside it. They were scans of extremely old photographs that had been uploaded to historical archives. The shocking detail was that the same man appeared in every image. The dates spanned decades, then centuries, yet the man's face had not changed even slightly. Director Chun proposed a possibility. He suggested imagining that someone from the modern era had been traveling further and further back into the past. Dr. Bake stared at the hologram in stunned silence as sweat formed across his forehead. Director Chun continued his theory. He proposed that this mysterious individual had traveled through time for a specific purpose, and that he had already succeeded in reshaping history. At that moment, Yo-won's eyes widened in shock. He realized who the man in the hologram was. The figure they were discussing was none other than the Blade God, the Lord of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sects. Director Chun voiced the conclusion openly. According to his theory, someone from the future had traveled into the past and established the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Because of that intervention, the course of history and the future itself had been altered. Dr. Bake asked in disbelief whether Director Chun truly believed such a thing. Director Chun answered without hesitation. He declared that he was certain of it. The Blade God had traveled to the past and changed the future. Within his thoughts, Yo-won struggled to process the revelation. If this theory was true, the Blade God was not originally from the Jonghu at all. He had come from the distant future, and the creation of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect had been part of a deliberate attempt to reshape history. Dr. Bake dismissed the idea as nonsense. He argued that it was impossible for someone to travel through time without authorization. Anyone who attempted to use the time portal without a nano machine or an identity chip would immediately be tracked down by TP, the Time Patrol. According to him, escaping their surveillance was impossible. He suggested that Director Chun's thinking had become unstable because of the difficult circumstances surrounding his corporation. Director Chun firmly rejected the accusation. The hologram shifted again. This time, the display showed a top-secret classification. A system message appeared requesting identity verification to open the file. Dr. Bake was shocked. He recognized the system as part of the History Archive, a restricted database that could only be accessed by members of the direct Chun family lineage. The system confirmed the first stage of verification and requested a retinal scan. Director Chun removed his glasses and allowed the system to scan his eyes. The second stage was completed. Next came voice verification. Director Chun spoke his identification clearly. He introduced himself as Chun Musong, director of Sky Corporation. Seeing the man's face without glasses stunned Yo-won. The resemblance was unmistakable. Inside his mind, Yo-won realized the truth that Chun Musong looked exactly like him. The man was a direct descendant of the Chun lineage, and even the symbol associated with his corporation resembled the emblem of the heavenly demon divine cult. If the recording truly came from the far future, it was highly likely that Chun Musong was Yo-won's descendant, and Sky Corporation might be what the heavenly demon divine cult had eventually become in the future. As Chun Musong searched through the classified archives, he finally located the records related to the heavenly demon divine cult. Dr. Bake reacted with surprise eyes as he read the archive title concerning the creation of the heavenly demon divine cult. However, Chun Musong immediately stopped him, reminding him not to read unnecessary information and to focus only on what was relevant. Meanwhile, Chun Yo-won observed everything carefully. Before him appeared the historical records of the cult's former leaders. The way the future preserved history through such systems fascinated him. As he continued reading, a familiar yet shocking title appeared: Arm-Severing Demon Emperor. The record identified the 24th cult leader, Chun Yo-won. Inside his mind, Yo-won was startled. That was a title he had never heard before. Until now, the title associated with him had been Demon God. The archive explained that the demon lord had severed the arms of enemies who threatened the divine cult, which earned him the title Arm-Severing Demon Emperor. The record then began describing how he had acted alongside his closest generals. Yo-won realized he was reading records of events that had not yet happened. Before he could continue examining them, Chun Musong pointed out another entry. Dr. Bake began reading it aloud. It described the 7th cult leader, Demonic Sword Emperor Chun Mu-hui. Chun Musong urged him to read the final part of the record. Dr. Bake froze in shock as he reached the conclusion. The archive stated that the 7th cult leader had been killed by the Blade God. Hearing this, Yo-won recalled a story he had once been told by the Left-Hand Guardian. After becoming the cult leader, he had also read about the incident in the cult's records. That had been the first known appearance of the Blade God. Now, with the information he was witnessing, the pieces of the mystery began to align in his mind. If the Blade God had truly traveled back through time, it explained several strange inconsistencies Yo-won had encountered. One was the traces of the founding heavenly demon and the berserk saber divine martial arts discovered in the abandoned Sword Valley. Another was the blade marks carved into the skin of the sword demon at the demonic academy. Both marks had been unmistakably produced by techniques of the berserk saber god. Ordinarily, martial arts improved over time. Later generations refined and advanced the techniques of the past. Yet the marks Yo-won had seen seemed more advanced than the timeline suggested. The order of progression had been reversed. That contradiction now made sense. Dr. Bake suddenly raised his voice in alarm. He demanded to know why Chun Musong had kept such information hidden. If the records were accurate, then the Blade God was not a heroic figure at all, but an extremely dangerous individual. Chun Musong explained the reality of their situation. The Blade God was the honorary CEO of a massive corporation that cooperated directly with the government. Even if they revealed such information, the outcome would be obvious. For now, Sky Corporation was no match for Blade 6, at least not yet. As he spoke, Chun Musong opened a pouch and removed several devices. Inside were 5 time portal packs and a syringe. He asked Dr. Bake whether it was possible to set the arrival year for the time pack. Dr. Bake confirmed that it was. However, he warned that if his theory about branching timelines was incorrect, if altering the past did not simply create a separate timeline, then the consequences could be extremely dangerous. He reminded Chun Musong of the concept known as the butterfly effect. Chun Musong simply smiled at the warning. He pressed a button on the small device in his hand. Calmly, he explained that creating butterfly effects was exactly what he intended to do. He mentioned preparing the Nano machine along with the 5 time packs. Dr. Bake suddenly realized something troubling. Only 2 packs would normally be required for a round trip. If Chun Musong had prepared 5, it meant he planned to do far more than simply deliver the Nano machine. Before Dr. Bake could finish his question, a sharp tone echoed. The augmented reality display abruptly froze. Then everything went dark. Yo-won was left staring into complete emptiness. The moment when Chun Musong was about to reveal something crucial had been cut off. Confused, Yo-won wondered what had just happened. Nano's voice returned, though still distorted. It reported that the black box security system had been reset and that unauthorized access was being blocked. Yo-won urgently demanded that Nano restore the recording. He felt certain that the final words Chun Musong was about to say were extremely important. Nano attempted to access the settings again. However, the system reported an error. The lock on the black box had been reset. Yo-won slowly moved his hand. For the first time since the strange vision began, he realized he could move his body again. However, something still felt wrong. He could hear sounds clearly, yet the visual scene remained dark. Only voices echoed in the emptiness. A familiar voice spoke somewhere nearby, saying that the place should be around there. Within his mind, Yo-won recognized the voice. It belonged to director Chun Musong. It sounded as if he was searching for something. Suddenly, a scream tore through the air. A sharp sound followed, accompanied by another cry of agony. Yo-won realized that those noises voices were screams of people being attacked. He could hear movement and rustling again as Chun Musong moved through the area. After a moment, Chun Musong spoke again. He seemed to have discovered identity plaques belonging to palace guards. From the information on them, he concluded that the guards had been trying to protect the arm-severing demon emperor. Hearing those words confused Yo-won. The arm-severing demon emperor referred to him. Soon afterward, the sound of a machine activating echoed nearby. Moments later, Chun Musong declared that he had found what he was looking for. More movement followed in the darkness. This time, there were no screams, as if the remaining people had already been killed. Yo-won grew increasingly frustrated at being unable to see what was happening. Then Chun Musong's voice spoke again. He commented that his noble ancestor appeared to be in a surprisingly good mood despite bleeding to death. At that instant, Yo-won's wandering mind became still. His vision suddenly cleared. Before him appeared a familiar scene. He saw himself. The image showed him as he had been 4 years earlier, gravely wounded and on the verge of death after being attacked by assassins. Until now, Yo-won had believed that Guard Jang had saved him that night. However, the vague memories he had carried since then were not mistaken. Chun Musong approached the dying Yo-won. He remarked that he needed to hurry before his ancestor died. Then he inserted a needle behind Yo-won's ear and another into his chest. After finishing the injection, Chun Musong commented that even watching the needle enter was painful. At that moment, Yo-won understood the truth. That was the moment when the nano machine had been implanted into his body. Inside his mind, Yo-won realized that it had never been Guard Jang who saved him. It had been his descendant, Chun Musong. Chun Musong then addressed his unconscious ancestor, expressing hope that he would succeed and accomplish something great for the sake of his descendants. Watching the scene, Yo-won began piecing together several truths. According to the historical records, he would eventually expand his power all the way to the Northern Sea Ice Palace before dying on a battlefield alongside the left and right guardians. Yet something important had changed. Those records described events that occurred when he did not possess Nano. Now the situation was different. Yo-won remembered what the archives had stated. The arm-severing demon emperor had survived countless assassination attempts, and one attempt had nearly succeeded before palace guards rescued him. But that record was incomplete. It had not been palace guards who saved him. It had been Chun Musong. That moment, the day Nano was implanted, had become the turning point, not only for Yo-won's life, but for the entire future of the world. Even though Chun Musong had killed the palace guards in the process, Yo-won decided that he would forgive him. Chun Musong checked a device and realized that the Time Patrol had likely detected his presence. Cursing under his breath, he admitted that he had no choice but to leave quickly. Before departing, he remarked that the nano machine he had implanted was cutting-edge technology and that Yo-won would eventually figure out how to use it. Watching the scene unfold, Yo-won smiled faintly. Earlier, Chun Musong had said he was trying to create a butterfly effect, but the truth was different. He had not created a butterfly effect, but he had created the demon god. Within his heart, Yo-won silently resolved that he would one day repay this debt. At that moment, the recording inside the augmented reality suddenly ended. Nano's voice echoed clearly inside Yo-won's mind. It reported that the recording had reached its end and asked whether he wished to replay it. Yo-won immediately called out to Nano, asking whether the system had recovered. Nano responded that all system damage caused by the lightning had been fully restored. During the recovery process, the system had completed an upgrade, allowing the gadolinium structure to withstand electricity. Yo-won paused in surprise at the mention of an upgrade. Such a feature was something even the scientists of the far future had not fully anticipated. The 7th generation nano machine possessed a unique property. Its structure was formed from a rare metal capable of learning and adapting to the shocks inflicted upon it. That metal was gadolinium, a mysterious substance that even future scientists barely understood. Because Nano had been constructed with gadolinium, it could evolve when exposed to extreme conditions. Yo-won had endured the dragon turtle's lightning with the help of several forces within his body: the heavenly demonic chi he cultivated, the absolute yin energy, and the flame chi he possessed. Through the interaction of those energies and the lightning itself, Nano had adapted and upgraded. Nano then informed him that several features that had been locked previously had been forcibly unlocked during the upgrade. It asked whether Yo-won wanted those functions locked again. Yo-won immediately questioned the situation. For 4 years he had attempted to access those features, yet Nano had refused every request. Now they had been unlocked automatically. Nano replied that it would lock them again if the user did not wish to keep them active. Instead, Instead, Yowon asked to see what the unlocked functions were, and Nano complied. A list of newly unlocked abilities appeared before Yowon's vision. When he saw the display, Yowon was stunned. Nearly 60 different functions had been unlocked, many of which appeared extremely unusual. Nano explained that these abilities had been released because the system had gained the capability to absorb and utilize external energy sources. Yowon quickly understood the meaning. The lightning chi from the dragon turtle had triggered the change. Without hesitation, he made his decision. He chose not to lock the features again. Nano acknowledged the command. As the interface responded, the triangular indicators beside the locked functions transformed into circles, signaling their activation. Afterward, Yowon gave another order. He asked Nano to repair the damaged meridians within his body once the system finished stabilizing. Nano confirmed the request and stated that it would restore all injuries inside his body. The moment Nano's voice ended, the dormant nano machines inside Yowon reactivated. The sparks of lightning surrounding Yowon began shining more intensely. The cultists guarding him instinctively stepped backward to avoid being struck by the growing electricity. Some of them shouted in alarm, believing the lightning was becoming stronger. The expressions of the 6 swords darkened with concern. Hobom, who had gathered flame chi in preparation, shouted loudly in worry as he endured the painful sparks spreading around Yowon. Yet the situation changed almost immediately. The lightning began to diminish. Baekji noticed the shift first. Wang Ho then observed more carefully and realized the truth. The lightning was not disappearing, it was being absorbed. The circle of sparks surrounding Yowon gradually flowed back into his body. As the lightning energy merged within him, a powerful aura finally began radiating from his body once more. The moment he opened his eyes, the cultists who had been waiting around him erupted in cheers. They shouted with relief that their lord had awakened and bowed in respect as they greeted the demon lord. Yowon slowly clenched his fist. The sensation inside his body felt strange, as if countless ants were moving beneath his skin. Despite the discomfort, he understood what it meant. Nano had fully recovered. At that moment, Hobom rushed toward him while holding Yowon's sword. Yowon calmly asked what had happened during the time he had been unconscious. Looking around, he realized that many of the warriors who had been present earlier were no longer there. Hobom quickly explained the situation. Nearly 2.5 hours had passed while Yowon was circulating his energy. During that time, the martial artists of the Orthodox Miram Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace had gone underground in pursuit of the dragon turtle's essence core. Another half hour had passed since then. Once they realized the demonic cult had no intention of interfering, both factions proceeded deeper underground to secure the essence core themselves. Although Yowon listened to the report, his mind was focused elsewhere. Inside his thoughts, he noticed that the balance of energy within his body still felt incomplete. Compared to the heavenly demonic chi, the absolute yin cold chi, and the fire Kirin's flame chi, the amount of lightning chi inside him was still insufficient. Meanwhile, voices suddenly rose from the group of Northern Sea Ice Palace warriors who had remained behind. Some expressed surprise that Yowon had already awakened. Others scolded their comrades who had gone underground, warning that they should not have pursued the essence core so recklessly. Yowon turned his attention toward them and asked who they were. Hobom explained that they were the personal guards and elders loyal to the Northern Sea Ice Palace's original master. Hearing the mention of elders, Yowon questioned further. At that moment, Danbake rushed forward and knelt before him. He urgently explained that those who had descended underground were led by Dan Juchin, the acting proxy of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, along with his loyal followers. They had acted independently without consulting the other members of the palace. Danbake quickly insisted that the remaining warriors had no intention of opposing the heavenly demon divine cult. A cold grin spread across Yowon's face as killing intent surged from him. He remarked that the situation was good because now he clearly knew whom he should kill and whom he should spare. The words turned Danbake's face pale. Ko Wang-hul stepped forward and offered to lead the way to the underground tunnel. Yowon gave no verbal response. Instead, he suddenly rose into the sky. There was something he wanted to test first. Within his mind, he ordered Nano to scan the underground area. Nano activated the compound scanning process and displayed the results through augmented reality within Yowon's vision. Through the virtual projection, Yowon examined the underground battlefield. He immediately noticed the severed neck of the dragon turtle, though something about it seemed strange. It appeared as if the creature had separated part of itself while escaping. The scattered dots within the projection represented the warriors of the Miram Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace. However, Yoan noticed something unusual. There were far more individuals present than expected, and the two factions appeared to be on the verge of fighting each other. Meanwhile, Hobum watched Yoan with confusion. He could not understand why the demon lord remained motionless instead of immediately pursuing the others underground. Suddenly, Yoan raised his voice and ordered everyone to step back. The command puzzled those around him. Before anyone could question him, a sharp metallic sound suddenly echoed through the air. The piercing noise forced the cultists to cover their ears. The deafening sound continued to reverberate around them. This was one of the newly unlocked abilities Yoan had been most curious about. Within his mind, he issued a command to Nano. He ordered the activation of the gadolinium nanosuit. Nano confirmed the command. Instantly, countless black particles began flowing out from Yoan's body. The particles gathered and condensed around him. Within seconds, they formed an ultra-thin suit of black armor that covered his entire body. Deep beneath the Northern Sea Ice Palace, the underground caverns had been torn open by the destructive force of the Heaven Flash. Numerous holes had been blasted through the earth, forming pathways that led deeper underground. Both the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace forces descended rapidly through those openings, each faction determined not to lose the Dragon Turtle's essence core. Among the Orthodox warriors, one of them expressed disbelief at the situation. He could hardly accept that they were now chasing the Dragon Turtle beneath the ground to cut it down. Jagal Sohi quickly warned Moyong Kang that if they destroyed the essence core, both the Northern Sea Ice Palace and the demonic cult leader would be enraged. Moyong Kang responded firmly that even if the demonic cult leader killed them for doing so, that outcome would still be far better than allowing him to obtain the Dragon Turtle's essence core. Suddenly, one of the warriors shouted and pointed ahead. The tunnel before them had been completely blocked by a wall of frozen ice. Inside his mind, Moyong Kang immediately recognized the technique. It was the ice-white divine arts of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. He realized that the Ice Palace warriors must have created the barrier intentionally to prevent the Murim Alliance from following them. That meant the Dragon Turtle's real body was likely somewhere beyond that point. Without hesitation, Moyong Kang drew his blade and shattered the frozen wall, rushing forward with determination. He declared that he would never allow the others to monopolize the essence core. However, the moment he looked deeper into the tunnel, his expression changed. The place was empty. Only the headless corpse of the Dragon Turtle remained. The foul stench of blood filled the cavern, casting a grim atmosphere over the scene. Shocked, Moyong Kang questioned why the Dragon Turtle was missing. At that moment, another voice answered him. It was not there. Turning toward the speaker, Moyong Kang demanded to know what had happened to the body and the essence core. The one who spoke was Dan Juchun. He explained that the Dragon Turtle had likely severed its own head and escaped. The Northern Sea Ice Palace warriors had arrived at the location earlier and witnessed the aftermath themselves. Moyong Kang repeated the explanation in disbelief, struggling to accept that the creature had beheaded itself. Dan Juchun admitted that he had also been shocked. After suffering such a devastating attack, he had believed the Dragon Turtle could not possibly still be alive. Jagal Sohi immediately voiced her suspicion. She suggested that the Northern Sea Ice Palace might be hiding the Dragon Turtle's corpse to monopolize the essence core for themselves. Before the argument could escalate further, a deep rumble shook the underground cavern. The tremor could not be felt on the surface, but within the cave it echoed clearly. Moyong Kang asked what was causing the shaking. Dan Juchun calmly pointed ahead. The ground before them was stained with fresh blood. He explained that those were the traces left by the Dragon Turtle as it fled. If the Murim Alliance still doubted his words, they were free to follow the trail themselves. Moyong Kang stared at the blood in disbelief. Jagal Sohi then questioned why the Northern Sea Ice Palace warriors had not pursued the creature. The first elder of the Ice Palace, Seol Youngi, answered. The Dragon Turtle was heading toward the lake located behind the Ice Palace. If they chased it any further, the tunnel might collapse or flood with water, which would trap and kill everyone inside. Realizing the implication, Moyong Kang slowly asked whether the essence core had been lost. Dan Juchun lowered his head slightly. With clear disappointment, he silently nodded. Oh Mubang immediately protested. He argued that they could not simply allow the Dragon Turtle's essence core to slip away. The creature was already wounded and fleeing. If they failed to pursue it now and finish it off, they would regret the decision forever. In his view, they could not afford to retreat. but Youngie reminded him of the danger they had just discussed. If the dragon turtle caused the caves to flood, everyone underground would drown. Mubang refused to back down. He insisted that if they were unwilling to take that risk, then they had no chance of ever killing the dragon turtle. If the creature escaped now and appeared again in the future, they would have no way of stopping it. Youngie faltered, unable to immediately answer. Meanwhile, Dan Juchin fell into thought. Inside his mind, he reflected that the dragon turtle had likely emerged for revenge. If it had only wanted freedom, it could have fled long ago. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted. A loud crack echoed through the cavern as fractures spread across the ceiling, sending fragments of rock and ice falling down. At that moment, Jigal Soi spoke to Mo Yong Kong through telepathy. She advised that they should retreat immediately. If the dragon turtle had truly escaped toward the lake, then no one would be able to obtain the essence core anyway. Mo Yong Kong agreed. As long as the essence core did not fall into the hands of the demonic cult, that outcome was acceptable. Having decided to withdraw, Mo Yong Kong turned toward Dan Juchin, intending to inform him of their decision. Before he could speak, someone suddenly appeared in the distance. A voice urgently called out for the palace master. Dan Juchin turned his gaze toward the approaching figure. It was Oh Young, the lieutenant of the Frost Sword Squad. Breathing heavily, Oh Young reported that a serious problem had occurred. Dan Juchin immediately demanded an explanation and asked about the warriors guarding the seal as well as the elders stationed there. Oh Young struggled to speak between breaths as he delivered shocking news. All of the warriors who had been protecting the seal had been killed. Dan Juchin was stunned. He demanded that Oh Young explain exactly what had happened. Oh Young reported that when they reached the location where the Adularia Ice Stone had been placed, they found the bodies of the array specialists and guards scattered everywhere. The entire group had been ambushed by an unknown organization. Judging from the footprints left behind, there were dozens of attackers involved. Inside his thoughts, Dan Juchin clenched his teeth in frustration. The situation had already been complicated by the dragon turtle, and now they were being ambushed as well. Grabbing Oh Young by the shoulders, he urgently asked where the attackers were and whether they had been tracked down. Oh Young explained that the culprits appeared to have drilled a hole through the ice stone and descended deeper underground. The Frost Sword Squad leader was already pursuing them. At that moment, Jigal Soi realized the implication. She stated that if the attackers had gone deeper underground, then they must be heading toward this very place. Everyone's gaze turned toward her. Just then, Mo Yong Kong focused on the dark opening of the tunnel. A bright flash of light was rushing toward them from the distance, growing larger with each moment. Reacting instantly, Mo Yong Kang ducked and shoved Jigal Soi to the ground. A violent streak of energy shot past them. Cries of pain erupted behind them. Where several Orthodox warriors had been standing moments earlier, 10 men were instantly sliced apart. The attack was ballistic sword chi, and their bodies were cleanly severed as the destructive flash passed through. Mo Yong Kong quickly asked Jigal Soi if she was unharmed. She expressed her gratitude for his quick reaction. Dan Juchin stared at the fallen bodies with a dark expression. Inside his thoughts, he recognized the technique immediately. Ballistic sword chi could only be used by someone who had reached at least the evolutionary realm. That realization made him question who among their enemies possessed such power. Everyone turned their attention toward the eastern side of the cavern, the direction in which the dragon turtle had fled. At the entrance of the cave stood a group of unidentified men. More than 30 warriors were present, each gripping a sword and radiating powerful energy. Many of them wore distinctive steel masks. Seeing those masks, Mo Yong Kong suddenly remembered a story Dan Juzong had told him earlier. Before he could speak, Dan Juchin shouted the answer aloud. These men belonged to the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. At that moment, one middle-aged man stepped forward from among them. Unlike the others, he wore no steel mask. A confident laugh escaped him as he emerged into the light. The man was Byuk Ryu, the leader of the Blade Mastery sect. Byuk Ryu laughed lightly and remarked that it was an honor that they still remembered the name of his sect. Mo Yong Kong immediately stepped forward and declared his identity as Mo Yong Kong, a master of the Murim Alliance. He angrily demanded whether Byuk Ryu truly believed he could escape after committing such an act. Byuk Ryu responded with a scoff. He explained that he had originally planned to quietly take what he needed and leave without anyone noticing, but the presence of the Murim Alliance had ruined that plan. With that, Byuk Ryu raised the small bell he held in his left hand. He gently shook it and calmly gave an order to the warriors wearing steel masks. It was time for them to begin their work. Inside his mind, Mo Yong Kong cursed in frustration. Even without exchanging blows yet, he could already sense the overwhelming strength radiating radiating from their opponents. Some of them felt so powerful that he could not even gauge the limits of their strength. Byuk-ryu laughed again and declared that everyone present could have survived if they had not been greedy enough to descend underground in pursuit of the dragon turtle's essence core. Since they had come this far, there was no choice but to eliminate them. He gave the order to attack. Moyeon-kang immediately shouted commands to his own forces to stop them. Both sides charged forward at once, roaring curses as they rushed toward each other with killing intent. At that exact moment, a loud crack echoed above them. The ceiling of the tunnel fractured and chunks of rock and ice began collapsing downward. Suddenly, the ground shattered open and a blazing streak of light descended from above. The force of the impact exploded directly into the formation of the steel-masked warriors, scattering their bodies violently as the energy blasted them apart. All three factions froze in shock as they stared at the figure that had just descended. For a moment, none of them could determine whether the being before them was human, a creature, or something else entirely. A luminous figure had flown through the air and now stood calmly between the two opposing sides. The mysterious individual wore a suit of black armor that reflected faint light across its surface. Everyone stared at the strange presence with confusion. Byuk-ryu was the first to react. He shouted angrily and demanded to know the identity of the newcomer. Before he could finish his question, something unexpected happened. The arm he had been pointing forward suddenly dropped to the ground. For a moment, he stared in disbelief. Then the pain struck. He screamed in agony as he realized that his arm had been severed. From within the black armor, a calm voice spoke. The voice requested that the helmet covering the head be removed. Nano immediately complied. The armor around the head parted and withdrew. Seeing his face, Jigal Sohee trembled and whispered the name in disbelief. It was Lord Chun. Inside his thoughts, Dan Jushin was filled with terror. Chun Yo-won had been cultivating lightning chi earlier and should not have been capable of moving yet. Struggling to maintain composure, Dan Jushin pressed his fist into his palm and greeted him respectfully, expressing relief that the cult leader appeared unharmed. Yo-won responded with a faint scoff. He questioned how Dan Jushin could claim to be glad for his well-being, while simultaneously attempting to steal something that belonged to him. Moyeon-kang fell silent at those words. However, the Northern Sea Ice Palace warriors did not remain quiet. Oh-mu-bang immediately objected. He argued that the dragon turtle did not belong to any single individual. Although Chun Yo-won had played the greatest role in the battle, everyone present had fought together to defeat the creature. Before the argument could escalate, the first elder Seol Youngi interrupted. He calmly explained that their intention had only been to confirm whether the dragon turtle was still alive and to retrieve its essence core. He asked Chun Yo-won not to misunderstand their actions. Through telepathy, Dan Jushin quietly praised the first elder for his quick thinking. As long as they had not actually taken the essence core yet, even the demonic cult leader would have no clear reason to blame them. Inside his mind, Dan Jushin admitted that it was fortunate the elder had spoken so carefully. The Northern Sea Ice Palace had no desire to provoke a direct confrontation with a man as terrifying as Chun Yo-won. In his view, the immediate priority should be dealing with the berserk saber of the Six Martial Arts sect before arguing over ownership of the essence core. However, something suddenly caught his attention. Moyeon-kang was staring at him with a strange expression, as if silently warning him not to say another word. Confused by the warning, Dan Jushin hesitated. Yo-won, who had been standing at the entrance of the opening, suddenly appeared directly in front of Oh-mu-bang. Oh-mu-bang hurriedly stepped forward and began protesting, questioning what the cult leader intended to do. Before he could finish his words, Yo-won's blade flashed. With a short, sharp scream, Oh-mu-bang's head split apart and fell to the ground, rolling across the cavern floor. The attack happened so quickly that the first elder standing beside him barely had time to react. Shocked by the sudden execution, Youngi demanded an explanation. Before his sentence could finish, another slash cut through the air. Youngi's right arm was severed and flung into the air. Pain twisted his face as a horrifying scream burst from his throat. Yo-won coldly stated that he had no intention of believing such absurd excuses. Only then did Dan Jushin finally understand the meaning behind Moyeon-kang's earlier warning. Inside his mind, he realized the terrifying truth. Chun Yo-won was far too powerful to reason with. Against such overwhelming strength, there was nothing they could do. Nearby, Byuk-ryu, still clutching the stump where his arm had been severed, furiously rang the bell in his hand and shouted for his men to kill Yo-won. At the signal, the steel-masked warriors who had been waiting in formation rushed forward. Observing them carefully, Yo-won immediately noticed something unusual. unusual. Every one of them possessed strength at the evolutionary realm, or higher, yet the martial arts they used did not resemble the techniques of the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Earlier, Danbake had mentioned that the former lord of the demonic cult was also said to wear a steel mask. That raised a troubling possibility. One of these masked warriors might be the former cult leader. The fastest way to confirm it was to confront them all directly. Without hesitation, Yoan rushed toward the charging warriors. His hand moved forward and condensed into a blade of energy shaped like a long sword. With a single motion, he severed one man's arm. Before the warrior could react, Yoan grabbed him by the collar and smashed his head forward in a brutal headbutt. The steel mask shattered instantly. When Yoan looked at the man's exposed face, his suspicion was confirmed. A disturbing bulge could be seen beneath the man's scalp. They were being controlled. Behind them, Byuk-ryu rang the bell again and screamed frantically for his men to keep attacking. Yoan ordered Nano to scan the faces of the masked warriors to determine whether the Supreme Heavenly Demon was among them. Nano replied that it required facial data to identify the target. Yoan admitted that he did not know what the former cult leader looked like. Nano informed him that without matching data in its database, identification was impossible. Realizing the scan would be useless, Yoan abandoned the attempt. Instead, he began grabbing the masked warriors one by one and smashing their heads against the cavern floor. In retaliation, the masked fighters launched volleys of throwing knives toward him. Yoan calmly deflected the blades with his sword. The knives ricocheted off his weapon and flew back toward their owners. Empowered by Yoan's internal energy, the blades struck with far greater force than before. They pierced through the warriors' defenses and tore into their bodies. Inside his thoughts, Yoan concluded that he would have to examine their martial arts individually. Only then would he be able to find the one who used the heavenly demon sword art. Not far away, Moyong Kang watched the battle with trembling disbelief. He admitted that he had always known Yoan was monstrous, but the black armor he now wore made him even more terrifying. Jigal Sohee observed that Yoan had not even used internal energy to defend himself against the incoming attacks. Byuk-ryu stared in horror as his elite Demon Iron squad was slaughtered before his eyes. Realizing the battle was hopeless, Byuk-ryu quietly cursed under his breath. Taking advantage of Yoan's focus on the other warriors, he turned and fled into the darkness. Jigal Sohee immediately urged Moyong Kang to retreat while Chun Yoan was occupied. Moyong Kang agreed. The Northern Sea Ice Palace faction reached the same conclusion. Although it was humiliating, it was also undeniable. Dan Juchin quickly ordered his men to retreat. The warriors nodded and began withdrawing toward the surface. They moved quickly, eager to escape the underground cavern, but suddenly Dan Juchin raised his hand and halted. Someone was approaching from deeper within the dark tunnel. Moyong Kang frowned as he stared into the shadows. When the figure stepped forward into the dim light, he recognized him instantly. The man walking toward them was Markham, the notorious Great Guardian of the demonic cult. Yoan issued a cold command. He ordered the Great Guardian to deal with the situation. The alliance had already been broken by greed, and the others had attempted to seize what belonged to him. Anyone who resisted should be killed. Moyong Kang froze in disbelief, stammering as he tried to understand the order. Before he could speak further, the sharp sound of steel leaving a sheath echoed through the cavern. Markim slowly drew his sword and pointed it toward the warriors of the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace. With unwavering loyalty, he declared that in the name of their lord, anyone who rebelled would be overpowered, and if they resisted, they would be killed. Inside his mind, Moyong Kang felt the situation collapse around him. The Dark King and the Six Swords troops stood before them, while the demonic cult leader himself remained behind them. They were completely surrounded. He desperately searched for a way to survive. If they asked for forgiveness and offered their help, perhaps the situation could still be resolved. But before he could voice that thought, Dan Juchin suddenly shouted. With absolute determination, the proxy master of the Ice Palace declared that no one should fear. He announced that he would clear the path himself and ordered the warriors of the Ice Palace to charge forward. Moyong Kang was stunned. He had been considering retreat, but Dan Juchin's declaration had ignited the conflict completely. There was no longer any way to extinguish it. Dan Juchin surged forward first. Cold Frost Chi burst from his sword as he charged directly at Markham. Their weapons collided with explosive force as Markham answered the charge with equal ferocity. Inside his thoughts, Dan Jushin burned with anger. Even if the demonic cult was one of the 3 greatest forces in Zhongyuan, they were standing on Ice Palace territory. In his mind, the cult had underestimated him far too greatly. Behind him, the warriors of the Ice Palace shouted encouragement. They declared that their proxy master had reached the mystic realm, placing him among the 5 strongest martial masters of Zhongyuan. At the same moment, the warriors of the demonic cult rushed forward as well. Chaetakim raised his voice, calling upon the brothers and sisters of the divine cult to join the battle. Mo Yong-kang watched the confrontation with visible tension. A battle in such a narrow and enclosed space would be extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, Jigal Sohi's thoughts moved in a different direction. Inside her mind, she realized that the chaos presented an opportunity. If the fighting distracted everyone, she could ensure that only she and Mo Yong-kang escaped alive. Pointing toward an opening in the battlefield, she urged Mo Yong-kang to move. Misinterpreting her intention, Mo Yong-kang charged forward to assist the Northern Sea warriors in the fight, believing he was supporting the plan. In truth, Jigal Sohi had intended to escape. Nearby, Ko Wang-hul and Hobum grinned with excitement and prepared to rush toward Mo Yong-kang. But before they could move, someone blocked their path. It was the 6th elder, Mong-mu. Mong-mu stepped forward with visible delight. For a long time, he had waited for an opponent worthy of his strength. Known throughout the Jianghu as a swordsman of extraordinary skill, Mong-mu had already proven himself in the fierce battles between the demonic cult and the unorthodox alliance. Now he faced Mo Yong-kang directly. Laughing loudly, he clashed swords with him. Unlike Mong-mu, who fought with excitement and courage, Mo Yong-kang felt increasing urgency. Dan Jushin shared the same concern. Both men understood that if they could not finish their battles quickly, the entire situation would soon collapse against them. The cavern carved by the dragon turtle descended into chaos. War cries echoed as the underground tunnel transformed into a battlefield. Warriors from every faction clashed fiercely within the narrow cave. Dan Jushin moved like a storm of frost. Every swing of his sword carried such intense cold chi that ice formed in the air wherever his blade passed. Markham narrowly avoided one of those deadly strikes despite the attack nearly reaching him. He slipped behind Dan Jushin and counterattacked. Before Markham's sword could reach his back, an ice shield instantly formed around Dan Jushin's body. Dan Jushin immediately retaliated. He unleashed the Ice White Divine Palm while twisting his body with a light footwork technique. Switching his sword into his left hand, he thrust toward Markim's heart. Markim reacted instantly, performing a backward roll that carried him safely out of the attack's path. Inside his thoughts, Dan Jushin frowned. The Dark King had evaded the strike at the very last moment and counterattacked without hesitation. He had heard that people called Markham the Wind God, and now he understood why. At the same time, Markham assessed his opponent calmly. Dan Jushin's cold chi was extremely powerful. It was clear that he had not become the proxy palace master merely through political maneuvering. Recognizing that testing each other further was pointless, Dan Jushin released the 8th layer of the Ice White Arts. White steam rose around his body, and frost spread across his skin as his aura intensified. Markham answered by raising his internal energy to its peak, unleashing the formidable power of the 10th mastery. Dan Jushin grinned fiercely and declared that it was time to stop probing each other and fight seriously. Meanwhile, Chun Yo-won continued slaughtering the remaining steel-masked warriors. However, he did not kill them immediately. Each time he struck one down, he first removed the mask to examine the person's identity. None of them were the person he was searching for. Only few masked warriors remained. They rushed toward him simultaneously and clashed their swords against his. Inside his mind, Yo-won sighed with frustration. The process was slow because he needed to observe their techniques carefully. So far, none of them had used the Heavenly Demon Sword art. He had only tested half of them. Suddenly, a masked master struck from behind. The man unleashed a powerful fist technique, sending a blast of internal energy toward Yo-won's back. The impact exploded loudly. But before the fist could even reach him, the energy scattered harmlessly. The attacker stared in disbelief, unable to understand why his attack had dissipated before touching Yo-won's armor. Yo-won calmly concluded that the man was not the person he sought. Extending his hand, Yo-won manifested a sword of black flame and struck the masked master. The force of the blow sent the man flying across the cavern. He landed directly between the battling forces of the Orthodox faction and the demonic cult. The Orthodox warriors were shocked when the masked fighter abruptly interrupted their battle and backed away. The black flames licking across his mask cracked it apart. When the mask shattered, his true face was revealed. Moyong Yu, the son of Moyong Kang, stared in disbelief. The man's hair had turned white and his face was covered with deep wrinkles. Yet the 6 seals engraved upon his forehead revealed his identity. He was Monk Guzhong, the former head of the Shaolin Temple. Moyong Yu was stunned. He confronted the monk, explaining that his father had once told stories about him. According to those accounts, the former abbot had vanished 18 years earlier. He demanded to know why such a revered figure had appeared among the warriors of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. As Moyong Yu approached him, the monk suddenly attacked. The former abbot unleashed the Shaolin Dragon Claw, forcing Moyong Yu to retreat instantly. Confused and desperate, Moyong Yu shouted that they had no reason to fight each other, but the monk did not answer. His eyes were unfocused and empty. Without speaking a word, he moved again and charged directly toward Chun Yeowon. Watching this, Moyong Yu realized the horrifying truth. The monk's eyes held no awareness. It was as if he cared about nothing except attacking the demonic cult leader. Many others in the cavern were just as shocked as Moyong Yu. Several warriors suddenly recognized the techniques being used by the steel-masked fighters. One shouted in disbelief that the sword technique he was witnessing was the 14th Plum Blossom sword technique. Another recognized the Diankang sect's sword technique, while someone else realized that a masked warrior was using the Wudang sect's sword style. At that moment, a realization struck Moyong Yu. The techniques they were witnessing were not ordinary martial arts. These were techniques that only the direct lineages of those great sects were allowed to learn. That meant the masked warriors battling Chun Yeowon were not ordinary fighters. They were martial masters who had vanished from the Jianghu. Meanwhile, far deeper in the cave, Byuk Ryu fled in terror. Inside his thoughts, frustration and rage burned together. He had spent 10 years capturing and torturing famous martial masters, brainwashing them until they became his Demon Iron Squad. They were meant to be unstoppable weapons. Even the Northern Sea Ice Palace and the Murim Alliance, both exhausted after battling the Dragon Turtle, should have been powerless against them. Yet Chun Yeowon had already slaughtered half of them. Byuk Ryu cursed the terrifying demon god as he ran, desperate to reach the remaining forces before they were destroyed. But the truth was worse than he realized. By that point, Chun Yeowon had annihilated every member of the Demon Iron Squad. Back in the cavern, Yeowon held the final masked warrior by the throat. After removing the mask and examining the man's face, he exhaled in disappointment. The person he was searching for was not there. At that moment, loud shouts erupted nearby, drawing his attention. Hobum and the demonic cult warriors were confronting the remaining members of the Orthodox faction. The Orthodox warriors shouted for the demonic cult to surrender. They mocked the cultists, declaring that their side held the advantage because they still had far greater numbers. One of them began boasting that if the demonic cult leader had not been present, the cultists would already have been defeated. Before he could finish speaking, a shadow suddenly appeared behind him. Yeowon had moved. Grabbing the man's head from behind, he calmly asked where the man with the bell had gone. The remaining warriors saw him and immediately panicked. Realizing that Chun Yeowon had arrived, they began fleeing in terror. Hobum shouted angrily for them to stop running. The man Yeowon held in his grasp desperately explained that the bell-wielding leader had fled in the same direction as the Dragon Turtle. He begged for his life, but before he could even finish his plea, Yeowon crushed his skull without hesitation. Inside his thoughts, Yeowon realized why the Dragon Turtle's body had been missing earlier. Hobum approached and respectfully returned Yeowon's sword. However, Yeowon declined it. He explained that there were still things he wanted to test and asked Hobum to hold onto the sword for a little longer. Then he turned his gaze toward the direction Byuk Ryu had fled. Within his mind, he asked Nano for the fastest possible method of transportation, and Nano immediately complied. Flames suddenly erupted from the soles of Yeowon's boots like a launcher. In the next instant, Yeowon shot forward like a missile, streaking through the cavern and disappearing toward the tunnel's end. Watching him depart, Seo Youngi let out a mocking laugh. He remarked that it seemed the demonic cult leader cared more about the Dragon Turtle's essence core than the lives of his followers. Ko Wang-hul responded coldly. He stated that Youngi had lost his arm precisely because he was foolish enough to believe that. The elder's expression hardened. Wang Hul continued speaking with absolute conviction. The Demon Lord had not abandoned them, he trusted them, and he believed that they alone were enough to defeat the enemies standing before them. Because of that trust, they would do everything in their power to live up to his expectations. Declaring their resolve, Wang Hul proclaimed the identity of their group. They were the Six Swords Troop, the swords of the heavenly demon divine cult. They were the swords of the demon god himself. With those words echoing through the cavern, the battle erupted once again. At the far end of the cavern lay the massive body of the dragon turtle. Near the enormous body lay the creature's final head. Close to the body, members of the Massacre Blade sect were already at work. The Massacre Blade Master himself was carefully dismantling parts of the dragon, while other warriors dug a pathway through the cavern to secure an escape route. Some of the men whispered nervously as they worked. They warned each other to handle the blood carefully, reminding one another that consuming it could cause a person's head to explode. Others stared at the enormous corpse with unease, wondering if the beast might somehow come back to life. One man immediately told them not to tempt fate by saying such things. Nearby, Wu Jinchang, one of the Massacre Blade sect leader's subordinates, shouted at the workers to stop talking and focus on their task. Standing beside him was Wan Sang-o, the sixth elder of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Unknown to most, Sang-o was actually a spy working for the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. Sang-o laughed quietly and admitted that he had not expected Chun Yo-won's power to be so useful for their plans. Wu Jinchang agreed. It was fortunate that they had been able to seize the dragon turtle's corpse for themselves. However, he warned that none of it would matter if they failed to extract the blood and the essence core before escaping. Sang-o confidently reassured him. According to him, Chun Yo-won should still be unable to move because of the lightning chi he had absorbed. Meanwhile, the Demon Iron Squad would deal with the Murim Alliance and the remaining forces of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Before he could finish speaking, someone suddenly shouted as they rushed toward them. It was Byuk Ryu. Sang-o immediately noticed the terrible condition of the man and asked what had happened to his arm. Byuk Ryu, gasping heavily, demanded to know where the Massacre Blade sect leader was. As he looked around, his eyes suddenly widened. The container meant to hold the essence core was still empty. Fury exploded from him. He shouted in disbelief that they had not yet extracted the dragon turtle's essence core. Sang-o tried to calm him down and asked him to explain what had happened. Byuk Ryu's expression twisted with fear and rage. Half of the Demon Iron Squad had already been killed. Chun Yo-won was slaughtering them as if they were nothing more than insects. Wu Jinchang was stunned. They had believed the demonic cult leader was incapacitated by the lightning chi. Sang-o insisted that he had personally seen Yo-won unable to move earlier, but Byuk Ryu's voice trembled with terror. The demon god was already heading toward them. Before he could finish speaking, a powerful rushing sound echoed through the cavern. The moment Byuk Ryu heard it, his face froze. Cursing under his breath, he turned toward the dark tunnel. Something was approaching at tremendous speed. Wu Jinchang, unfamiliar with the terror that name carried, asked what it was. One of the warriors answered in a trembling voice that the demon god had arrived. Before anyone could react, Yo-won shot past them like a streak of light. His blade moved once, and the warrior who had spoken was instantly cut in half. Blood splashed across the faces of those nearby as his body collapsed. The remaining men stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Yet Yo-won paid them no attention. His focus was fixed on only one thing: the severed head of the dragon turtle. He calmly asked Nano whether the creature was truly dead. Nano confirmed that the dragon turtle had indeed died. However, while the creature itself was dead, the lightning energy within its body still remained extremely active. Clad in the black Nano suit, Yo-won landed on one knee after dropping from a tremendous height. The sight was thrilling and terrifying for those who witnessed it. Members of the Massacre Blade sect froze as fear spread across their faces. Yet Yo-won himself looked irritated. Inside his mind, he complained to Nano that landing like that left him vulnerable to attacks. Nano calmly explained that the nanosuit's magnetic field flight landing technique was widely known as a superhero landing, often used to intimidate enemies. Yo-won immediately dismissed the explanation. In his opinion, it was terrible for the knees and should never be used again. One of the warriors shouted for everyone to prepare themselves. Before the order could even finish, his head was sliced cleanly into 3 pieces. Yo-won passed him in a blur and spoke coldly. He remarked that the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect had been hiding here like rats, stealing what belonged to him. Byuk-ryu, overwhelmed with panic, began ringing the bell in his hand repeatedly. Yoan responded with indifference that the bell was useless now. All of the Demon Iron Squad had already been destroyed. Death closed in on Byuk-ryu instantly. Terrified, the man fell to his knees and begged desperately for mercy. But just as Yoan's strike was about to fall, someone stepped out from the shadows of the cavern. The newcomer wore a steel mask. Byuk-ryu's face lit up with relief as his final trump card had appeared. At the same moment, Yoan's eyes widened. The masked man had just used a sword technique Yoan instantly recognized. Byuk-ryu burst into laughter. He asked Yoan if he recognized the technique. It was the Heavenly Demon Sword art. Byuk-ryu admitted that when he found this man inside the cave, the mental control he normally used had somehow weakened. However, the coincidence had worked perfectly. Now the two of them could fight each other. Byuk-ryu said he was eager to see Yoan's reaction once he saw the face beneath the mask. At the sound of the bell ringing again, the masked man slowly removed it. Byuk-ryu laughed wildly. The man standing before Yoan was Chun-inji, the former leader of the demonic cult. He was Yoan's grandfather. Byuk-ryu had not originally intended to use him in this way, but the situation had turned out to be incredibly fortunate. When the Berserk Saber forces entered the frozen cavern where the dragon turtle had once been sealed, they had discovered Chun-inji nearly frozen to death. After learning what had happened inside the cave, they used special medication to revive him. They had succeeded just in time. With a triumphant smile, Byuk-ryu issued a warning. If Yoan attempted to resist even a single attack, Chun-inji's head would immediately explode. Inside his mind, Byuk-ryu was thrilled. He had not expected this plan to work so perfectly. Even the terrifying demon god could not act freely when his own family was placed in danger. Byuk-ryu poured his internal energy into the bell and rang it again. The sound reverberated through the cavern as if hundreds of bells were ringing at once. Then he issued his command. He ordered Chun-inji to use the sacred sword techniques of the demonic cult and kill the demon god. He ordered the grandfather to kill his own grandson. Chun-inji slowly began to move. The veins on his forehead bulged as the command forced his body into action. Without hesitation, he rushed toward Yoan while unfolding the sacred heavenly demon sword art. 24 rays of sword energy burst forward simultaneously, forming a dazzling storm of blades rushing toward Yoan, yet Yoan did not move. Watching him stand completely still, the masters of the Berserk Saber of the Sixth Martial Arts sect smiled with satisfaction. A brilliant sword strike pierced Yoan's body in an instant, but the moment the blade passed through, they realized something was wrong. It was only an afterimage. Yoan had already moved. In the next instant, he appeared directly behind Chun-inji and seized him by the head. Byuk-ryu immediately rang the bell 3 times and screamed in panic, accusing Yoan of trying to kill his own grandfather. Yoan did not answer. Instead, he glared at Byuk-ryu and infused Chun-inji's fallen sword with powerful sword chi. The weapon shot forward with explosive speed toward Byuk-ryu. The blade narrowly missed his skull, but sliced off his ear before embedding itself in the ground. Screaming in agony, Byuk-ryu clutched the wound. At the same moment, lightning chi surged from Yoan's body and struck Chun-inji. Electric currents coursed through him as Yoan used the lightning to disrupt the parasite controlling his mind. Desperate, Byuk-ryu shouted for his remaining warriors to attack immediately. Hundreds of sword chi strikes were unleashed at once. Explosions of energy filled the cavern as the attacks converged on Yoan's position. Dust and debris rose into the air, completely obscuring the scene. Byuk-ryu waved his hand with internal energy to disperse the dust. When the smoke cleared, everyone froze in disbelief. Around Yoan stood a massive circular shield formed from lightning and sparks. The barrier had blocked every incoming attack. Even more shocking was what had happened to Chun-inji. His head had not exploded as Byuk-ryu had threatened. Instead, he had collapsed unconscious. Yoan had already removed the parasite that controlled him. Looking coldly at the surviving enemies, Yoan spoke. They had tried to force his grandfather to kill his own grandson. Originally, he had considered leaving a few of them alive to extract information, but now he had changed his mind. As lightning crackled around him, an overwhelming wave of cold energy flooded the cavern. Countless ice swords materialized throughout the space. His voice echoed through the cave as he declared their deaths. In the next instant, the ice sword surged forward. Thousands of translucent blades rained down like a storm. Within seconds, the clear ice turned crimson with blood. Screams of agony filled the cavern as the warriors were cut apart. More than 30 members of the Berserk Saber forces died before they could even react. Byuk-ryu desperately tried to block the incoming blades with only one arm. A strike smashed into his face, knocking several teeth out as he stumbled back. Wu Jinchang and Wang So looked around in horror as cries for help and mercy echoed from every direction. Yowen suddenly extended his hand toward Byuk-ryu. The bell flew through the air into Yowen's grasp. Without hesitation, he smashed the bell against Byuk-ryu's head. The bell shattered instantly, and the impact sent Byuk-ryu flying several meters across the cave. By now, more than half of the Berserk Saber warriors had been killed. As Wu Jinchang fought desperately to survive, he noticed something strange. Yowen was enraged, yet he had not used the devastating Heavenly Flash technique. If he had used it, everyone present would already be dead. Nearby, Wang So leaned against the wall, thinking the same thing. He believed death was inevitable. Dozens of ice swords rushed toward him. Closing his eyes, he prepared for the end, but the expected pain never came. When he opened his eyes again, the ice swords had moved away from him. Wang So slowly opened his eyes as confusion filled his face. The ice swords that should have pierced his head had moved away at the last moment. He looked around in disbelief, trying to understand why he was still alive. His gaze moved across the cavern walls and ceiling. There were no marks, not a single scratch from the countless ice swords. At that moment, realization struck him. Yowen was using the ice swords as controlled chi blades so the cave itself would not collapse. His conclusion was correct. At the same time, Nano issued a warning. The cavern was unstable, and the probability of total collapse was extremely high. Yowen immediately thought of the lake located further east of the cavern. If the cave collapsed and the water from the lake rushed in, the Six Swords troop and his unconscious grandfather would be trapped and drowned. A loud impact echoed behind him as Yowen turned his head. Wang So was striking the cavern wall with his sword, attempting to break it apart. Yowen realized what the man was trying to do. If the cave collapsed, everyone inside would be buried or drowned together. Nano confirmed that repeated strikes against the cave walls were rapidly increasing the chance of collapse. Wang So was not the only one. Wu Jinchang also began striking the walls while shouting loudly. He declared that even if they could not defeat the demon god directly, they could still stop him by destroying the cavern itself. If the cave collapsed, Yowen would be buried along with them. Meanwhile, the remaining warriors charged toward Yowen. Within his mind, Yowen gave Nano permission to draw as much internal energy as necessary. Nano immediately complied. At that moment, Yowen raised both hands. A sword of black flame appeared in his right hand. In his left hand, a sword of black ice materialized. Wu Jinchang's face turned pale with terror. Yowen was wielding the formless sword in both hands simultaneously. In the next instant, the two weapons moved. The blazing black flame burned everything it touched, while the black ice froze the very air itself. Their bodies were torn apart in an instant. Meanwhile, Wang So remained focused on destroying the cavern wall. He shouted that if this cave was to become their grave, then Yowen would die there with them. Before he could finish speaking, Yowen appeared behind him. One swing of the blade cut him cleanly in half. Yowen coldly told him to continue his meaningless talk in hell. Nearby, Byuk-ryu desperately poured his internal energy into his sword and struck the cave wall again. The impact cracked the stone. Water began seeping through the fractures. Byuk-ryu laughed madly. He declared that it was over. Even if he died, he would succeed where his higher-ranking sect leaders had failed. He would drag the demon god down with him and drown together in the collapsing cave. Before he could finish his sentence, a massive rock fell from the ceiling and crushed his head instantly. Nano then warned that the cavern had reached its limit. Total collapse was imminent. Yowen quickly placed his palm against the cracked wall. Cold chi surged from his body. Even if he could not completely stop the incoming water, he needed to buy time for his followers to escape. At that moment, Yowen heard heavy movement approaching from behind. They were the Six Swords along with roughly 50 members of the demonic cult. They immediately noticed Yowen standing alone, pressing his palm against the cracked wall while frost spread across it. Hobum called out to him in confusion. Before they could approach any closer, Yowen shouted sharply for them to stop. He warned them not to come any further because the cave was about to collapse. Almost immediately after his warning, the cavern trembled violently. The entire cave rumbled, confirming his words. It was clear that the structure would not hold much longer. Yowon quickly issued orders. He told Hobum that somewhere nearby there should be an old man who had been struck by an ice sword. That man was the former Supreme Heavenly Demon, Chun Inji. Hobum was ordered to take him out of the cave immediately. Munku's face filled with worry. She demanded to know what Yowon intended to do. Yowon smiled calmly. He explained that once everyone had escaped, he would retrieve the dragon turtle's essence core and leave the cave afterward. He could not move while they were still there. Munku fell silent at his words. Hobum agreed with Yowon. If they remained, they would only get in his way. Ko Wang-hul immediately shouted for everyone to obey the Demon Lord's command and retreat as quickly as possible. Before leaving, Munku called out again, telling Yowon that he must come out right away. Yowon looked at her and simply nodded with a faint smile. Once the group began retreating, Yowon felt relieved. Now nothing remained to distract him. He quietly asked Nano how long the ice wall could withstand the water pressure building behind it. Nano analyzed the situation and estimated that the wall would hold for roughly 15 minutes. It advised Yowon to escape before the barrier broke. Yowon decided that 10 minutes would be enough. With that, he removed his hand from the frozen wall and climbed onto the enormous shell of the dragon turtle. He suspected the essence core was hidden beneath it. As he approached the center of the shell, he noticed a hole where sparks were flashing violently. Suddenly, lightning surged from the opening and pillars of lightning burst upward from the shell. Yowon stepped back cautiously, unwilling to take unnecessary risks. From within the lightning, a voice echoed with manic laughter. The voice declared triumphantly that it had finally absorbed the dragon turtle's lightning chi. As the pillars of lightning faded, a young man descended from the shell. Lightning crackled around his body as if he were a god of thunder. Then he spoke. He described Yowon's pale face and sharp eyes before laughing again. In his mind, there was no doubt that the man standing before him had to be the demon god. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.